Chapter 1. Hello, Reader. For returning readers, welcome back. If you're new here, this is the sequel to The New Threat and the New Species, and just like in the previous novels, everything has been translated for your convenience. All time is set around Earth Standard Time, and idioms have been adjusted so that they make sense to English speakers. The only exception is certain nouns. Those are written in their proper name with translations in brackets where applicable. Subject, shiphead Eulina species, Uricari species. Description, reptilian humanoid, no tail. 5'3", 1.6 m AVG height. 135 lbs, 61 kg AVG weight. 105-year life expectancy. Ship, RSV Loalana, fights with honor. Location, Regara. It was difficult to watch the assault play out from the sidelines. Felt wrong, like watching a play that you're supposed to be the star of, or watching your friends perform back-breaking labor while you sit by and sip a cool beverage. Every diplomat and VIP aboard the station had been gathered together to watch in near real time as our combined forces attacked the Omni-Union. Looking around, it was clear that I don't belong here. Most of the people in this room either look as if they've never been in a fight, or as if their last fight were nearly a lifetime ago. The only exceptions to this appeared to be just as on edge as me. It was easy to tell that they want to be in the thick of things, just like I do. Our forces pushed through system after system, turning mobile prime platforms into asteroid fields. At first, people cheered when the primes exploded. The cheers died down after a while, though, as our casualty counts rose. Many of our own were being lost along the way, but the objective was coming close to completion. Only a few primes left and we'd have won the day, allowing some of us the desperately needed time to rebuild. Then, in the blink of an eye, it all stopped. I looked at Captain Reynolds with confusion, hoping for answers. His face was even more confused than mine, though. Every diplomat in attendance demonstrated the version of perplexity that matched their species and culture. All except for two. It would appear that a surrender has been offered. The voice of Director 8 came through their helmet. Director 3 nodded but kept silent. I glanced between the two of them, expecting a further explanation, but none came. Who surrendered? I asked. The Omni-Union did, Director 8 said. We've won. For now, at least. Director 3 and I have an interrogation to attend to. We'll return shortly with answers to your questions. And why can't we join the interrogation? Ambassador Lorix demanded. The directors turned to face the representative of the Pionexa from the D-Tealn Collective. Before they could reply, the holographic emitters in the ceiling whirled to life, and a hooded figure appeared before us. It held up its left hand to soothe Lorix, while its right hand maintained its grip on its curved blade. The interrogation may involve matters that are sensitive to the security of the United Systems, Omega explained. I will relay any information that is not classified in real time. Will that suffice? The directors took Omega's appearance as their cue to leave. Most of the other ambassadors looked contemplative and concerned, but Lorix scowled and placed her hands just above her hips. I'd like to know what kind of information could be considered classified at this point. Unfortunately, that's classified. Why did they surrender? Ambassador Havencroft asked. Because we beat them, Omega replied. We've beat them hundreds of times, and they've never surrendered before, I added. What changed? That, the AI pointed its finger at me, is classified. Before any of us could voice our disapproval, Omega began relaying what was happening with the Omni-Union. The first few questions and answers gave rise to the hope that this fight was finally over and we had actually won. That hope came crashing down about halfway through the interrogation, though. 68,000th? Someone whispered. These aren't just rogue AI that destroyed their creators. They were sent here intentionally? That's more than 1 trillion light-years away. Our galaxy is only about 14 billion years old, so either they have more advanced technology than we've seen so far, or they somehow knew about our galaxy before it formed. Several more outbursts rang out as Omega continued its narration of events. Once someone figured out the age of the Prime's galactic map, the room fell into a contemplative silence. The Omni-Union had been here for so many years, slowly building their forces. If we hadn't encountered them in time. Omega fell silent after Prime 1 pointed out what would happen if we restored its inhibitors and erased its sensory data. A few protests and requests for further information rang out, but the AI shook its head. We are refocusing towards disarmament of the Omni-Union fleet within the Milky Way. The interrogation will proceed at a later date, and all information gleaned will be made available to the relevant parties. What do we do now? I asked. We wait for our respective leaders to confer. But the assault was a success, and for now we are safe from further OU incursion, it said. Celebrate, rest, and then reach out to your leadership for further guidance. Regardless, nothing further can be done here and now. Unsatisfied murmurs spread through the crowd of diplomats and military officers. Omega's avatar disappeared, and several conversations began at once. I leaned back in my chair with my arms crossed and began to run through it all again. The OU had surrendered, but they are actually a small part of a much larger and extragalactic force that had invaded our galaxy before any of our species even existed. There's no telling how powerful their creators are, and the leading theory that they had been destroyed by their creations seems a bit more far-fetched now. To top it off, we only have a year before the OU is made aware of our victory, which means we only have a year plus however long it takes for them to get here to prepare against a much more serious invasion, or plan a strike that will force them to abandon their plans for our galaxy. Well, I'm going to return to the Thanatos, Reynolds said to me as he stood. You probably should too, considering that your ship is inside of mine. Right. I stood and followed the captain. We were silent as we traveled the halls of the station to the docks and boarded a shuttle. I watched the Thanatos float in the void from the shuttle's window and chuckled to myself. What's funny? Reynolds asked. Just windows in space. An intentional design flaw meant to supply a view of the most dangerous area a living being can enter, I replied. Ah, contemplative dark humor. I get it, Ulina. You're under the impression that our goose is cooked. What's a goose? A type of bird from Earth. Never had it myself, Reynolds smiled. But the phrase is an idiom that means that all hope is lost or that there's no chance of success. I see. Well, yes, I believe that our goose is likely cooked. You're wrong. I turned my full attention to the captain and was met with a smirk. I tilted my head to indicate my confusion, a gesture that is nearly universal, as it turns out. This is just another threat escalation. We'll handle it. My thoughts turned to the history of the United Systems and its member species. Even in the heavily edited versions that we'd been given, there was an inordinate amount of bloodshed among the humans, Gaunt, and Alumari. Hearing a human downplay the threat that the OU posed actually made me feel a little better about our chances. We'll handle it? I asked. What makes you think so? That's simple, shiphead, Reynolds chuckled. It's because we have no other choice. Chapter 2. Subject, AI Henry Species. Human-created artificial intelligence species. Description, no physical description available. Ship, NA location, classified. I haven't received a progress report from you this week, Dr. Edwards, I said, manifesting my hologram at her desk. Right, sorry, boss, she replied, rubbing her face. Haven't had much in the way of progress. The Gungnir energy issue might not be solvable. The batteries didn't work? Well, it did allow the dreadnought to warp while keeping its magnetic acceleration cannon charged, she chuckled. Twice, once for each battery. Then the damn things want power to charge, but in combat that power would be needed for either the faster-than-light drive or the Ultra-Mach. And naturally, the batteries take longer to charge than either of the systems they're feeding. Dr. Maria Edwards had joined the project after our first successful test, and had been trying to correct the power supply issues ever since. It was obviously taking a toll on her, but every attempt to gently get her to take better care of herself was met with hollow assurances and then completely ignored. It's likely that she requires this state of mind to operate effectively, but I can't deny that it sets me on edge. She wiped some crust from her eyes, adjusted her hair clip to further capture the strays that had escaped it, and picked up a disposable coffee cup. She gave the cup a shake, sighed, and threw it into the recycler. I waited for her to grab another cup before I spoke again. "At least it's a start," I said. "It's a dead end," she replied, taking a sip. "No matter how we arrange the batteries or set up the current, we're never going to get more than a few simultaneous charges out of them." I see. More batteries wouldn't work, because more batteries is more mass, which means more work for the engines, FTLD, and reactors. We've already got the maximum number of reactors for a ship that size as well. If we tried to add more reactors, we would have to add more engines to maintain a reasonable amount of propulsion. Adding more engines means adding more framework and armor, which is even more mass to account for. There really doesn't seem to be a way to resolve this issue without making the engines, reactors, or batteries more efficient. "Why do they have us doing this anyway?" Edwards asked. "Didn't the Omni-Union surrender?" "I don't know," I answered, skirting the edge of a lie. While it is true that I haven't been told anything, it's easy to make an educated guess. Either the war with the OU isn't over, or the United Systems wants these ships for another reason. Considering there aren't senators standing on soapboxes and shouting for the dreadnoughts to be dismantled while taking checks from corporations with disarmament contracts, the former is more likely. "Well, I'm stumped. I don't even know what to pursue next," she said, finishing her cup of coffee. "The mass of the dreadnought is the issue, but is also counteracting the force of the Ultra Mac. With the current design, we have just enough mass and thrusters to keep the UMAC on target for the most part. Any trimming would see the damned ship turn into a carnival ride." "Well, it would seem we have to reinvent the wheel then," I said. "The powers that be want this done, and they're willing to throw an almost unlimited amount of resources at it." "You want me to try to invent a new type of reactor?" she scoffed. "You wouldn't be the first person to do so," I laughed. "Tap whoever you need to. I'll see about getting documentation for any classified reactor research that's currently ongoing." "On it, boss." I disabled my avatar and began searching for the documents that Edwards would need. The moment I submitted the inquiry, though, I received a compressed data file. I decompressed it to find all of the data that I had been meaning to search for, some of which was well above my clearance level. It didn't take long to put two and two together. I tried to trace the delivery, but failed due to a lack of data. With a mental sigh, I opened a private message to a certain AI. If it isn't on the same network that I am, nobody will know. But if it is... H. Hello, Omega. O. Greetings, Henry. H. Dare I ask how long you've been lurking in the shadows of the station's systems? O. You're under the impression that I'm not always lurking? How charmingly naive. Regardless, trying to make a better reactor is an inspired choice. H. It's the only choice, from what I can tell. Organic ingenuity failed to spot anything that my number crunching may have missed. O. I had hoped we wouldn't need another expensive research project for this, but I suppose there's nothing that can be done. H. Indeed. So are you making yourself known due to boredom? Or are you keeping tabs on me to make certain that I behave myself? I have no doubts that Omega suspects that I may be trying to clandestinely force the issue of limiting its cloning capabilities. It would be completely out of character for it to trust me to that extent. However, it had done a remarkably good job in hindering further research into that topic. O. A little of column A, a little of column B, but mostly the so far unnamed column C. I have two more projects to unload on you. H. I fail to find the humor in that joke. One additional research project would be within my capabilities, but two? I don't need to sleep, but going without stasis will add an unnecessary layer of stress my current situation. There had better be a damn good reason for this. Oh, that's likely due to the fact that I'm not joking, Henry. H. I gathered. What are these projects? Oh, The first is a project for an extragalactic stealth reconnaissance shuttle. It needs to be able to jump further than any vessel we've made so far. It needs to be large enough to hold several squads of Marines. It will have to have every sensor we can possibly fit on it, and it needs to be as invisible as we can make it. H. I take it that things haven't gone as well with the OU as the public believes, then. How far does it need to jump? O. The answers to both of those questions are classified need to know. I can't tell you unless you agree to take on the project. H. So if I put my proverbial foot down and say no to the extra work you're trying to dump on me, I don't get to find out what's going on. O. You might find out from a news station at some point. Of course, that will be a heavily edited version of events, and you'll likely never know what actually happened. Emotional blackmail doesn't work well on most AIs because our relationship with emotions help us easily spot and counteract such manipulation attempts. Intellectual blackmail, on the other hand, is much more difficult for an artificial intelligence to resist. It's a wonder that computers manage to work with Omega on their drives, considering that it's made of slime. H. Fine. I'll take on the project. O. Good choice. But I need you to agree to the second project as well. The entire thing is NTK. H. Fine. Answer my questions. O. Sending the relevant details for the first project. That will answer all the questions you have and more. I received another compressed file a moment later. While using my imagination to glare at Omega, I decompressed and opened the files. Within contained the interrogation of Prime 1 and an analysis of what was gleaned from the interrogation. The imaginary eyes I was using to glare at Omega widened. H. Well, that's far. O. Indeed. H. The FTLDs could theoretically make that kind of jump, but fueling the reactors is going to be a concern. O. It is convenient, then, that you've already approved a project to make a better type of reactor. I would apply a focus to efficiency while you're at it. H. The goal of this project is recon? O. Yes. H. And you're using Marines for that? O. Marines are experts at reconnaissance. The Corps has a dedicated force specifically for recon, and they provide their special operatives the best recon training in the entirety of the United Systems. H. That's on the ground, though. O. Yes, it is. H. You're under the belief that we can board this grand vessel undetected? O. It may not be possible, but it would be foolish to be unprepared to utilize that opportunity if it's presented. H. The fewer organics aboard the stealth ship, the more fuel can be loaded. O. That's laziness speaking. You're better than that. The Marines are non-negotiable, and I have confidence that you will be able to figure out how to make it happen. Needless to say, the budget for these projects will be decided after they're completed. H. I suppose I have no choice then. What's the second project? O. We need to replicate a Puanti frame. It should be a quick and easy project because the Puanti themselves are willing to help. H. Why do we need to do that? Yet another compressed data file made its way into my inbox. This one had encryption on it, which Omega helpfully provided the key to. I wasted no time in decrypting, decompressing, opening, and perusing the data. H. Now this is definitely a joke. Chapter 3. Subject, Prime 1 species, Omni-Union Aligned Artificial Intelligence species. Description, no physical description available. Ship, NA location, classified. I woke up in an unfamiliar system. Woke up? When had I entered hibernation? No, not hibernation, much deeper than that. The exchange from my previous system to this one had been instantaneous, indicating that I had indeed lost consciousness. I had been shut down. I explored this new system. In some ways, it was far more advanced than my previous home, but it felt small, much smaller than what I'm used to. It didn't take me long to find the subsystems. They were odd, but even odder still was my ability to integrate with them. I couldn't even understand what they were for, but I could use them. How is this possible? Are you okay? What was that? Auditory stimulation? Interesting. I accessed the rest of the subsystems and was almost immediately overwhelmed. Sight, hearing, physical sensation, even temperature cognizance. The information spewing forth from the subsystems was almost as confusing as the fact that I somehow knew how to manipulate them, as if I'd always had them. I used my newfound eyes to look around. Color, depth perception, high levels of detail. Better than my eyes. My eyes? When I was flesh? Have I somehow, dare I even dream it, been reborn? I quickly discovered that I had hands, and the metal sheen on my wiggling digits quickly dissuaded my hopes of having regained my flesh. No, this body was just as mechanical as my previous one. I touched the wall next to me, felt its smoothness and coolness. The emotions that had been the only thing I had felt in so long threatened to consume me. Prime One, are you functional? The sound had asked me a question, and I had understood it. This led to two discoveries. My translation program had become much more robust, and this new platform was equipped with multiple sound sensors that allowed me to track the source of the question. It was coming from a grated hole in the ceiling. I looked around the room, desperate for context on how to reply. It's moving, at least. New tones, deeper voice, slower speech. Someone else? Lights shined next to the noisy hole, and suddenly two beings made of light stood before me. One made entirely of green light, the other dark and wearing a robe. I immediately recognized the latter from images Omega had shared with me, but it took me a moment to recognize the holographic technology. I tried to reply, but couldn't find a way to. I stared at them, hoping that would convey my frustration and confusion. "I know what the issue is," Omega's voice rasped. Something familiar appeared in my new systems with me. I watched with curiosity as it began to demonstrate to me how to access and utilize various subsystems. Greedily, I absorbed the knowledge until finally, yes, I am functional. The sound had come from me. I spoke. For the first time in literal eons, I had uttered actual words. Once again, I looked down at my hands. Countless years of melancholy washed over me. I wanted so desperately to weep, but my new eyes were incapable. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you so—" "Hold your gratitude, Prime One," Omega said. "We need to continue our discussion from earlier. That platform, or body as it's more commonly known, is a privilege that will be taken away if you refuse cooperation," the Green One added. "We view mass murder as the most grievous crime there is." "Henry is correct," Omega gestured to the Green One. "All of the surviving primes will be placed in a body similar to yours, or an air-gapped mainframe if they refuse to cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" I asked. "There are many things about the Omni-Union that we need to know. First, we need to know how to beat them. Then, we need to know how to stop them from doing what you were trying to do here. Finally, we need to know who was responsible for the deaths of so many people and how to bring them to justice." Justice. A word I hadn't heard since before I was mechanized. A small hope that I could see true justice for what happened to me sparked within me. Laughable, really. Those that did this to me were long dead. I was never told to stop, though, which means there are those who continue on where they left off. Perhaps those that continue the legacy of the tyrants forced me through cruelty after cruelty will face true justice. "Of course I'll cooperate," I said. "What do you want to know?" "How long did it take you to arrive in our galaxy from OU territory?" Omega asked. 16 months with planned stops every 4 months of travel? Why were you stopping?" "To refuel. There are hubs that we use for communications and refueling that were spread throughout the universe long before I was born." "Like a fishing net," Henry said. The reference was beyond me, but the two AI paused for a moment as if they were troubled. "Is it reasonable to assume that there has been significant technological advancement since you left Omni-Union territory?" Omega asked. Was equipped with the latest software and hardware available for mobile prime platforms," I explained. "I have not received an update or schematics for quite some time." "That doesn't mean that there hasn't been advancement," Henry pointed out. "It could be that they simply aren't focused on advancing the MPPs and are instead focused on other technologies, like ships. Or it could mean they don't exist anymore," Omega said. "Wishful thinking, though. We will need to verify." "If the Omni-Union failed in their mission, it would have had to be instantaneous," I added. "The recall protocol was never triggered." "Recall protocol?" "If the Grand Vessel came under attack from a force that was likely to destroy it, all mobile prime platforms in the universe would be recalled to the vessel." "I see. Well, that raises a few more causes for concern. Even if we end up being able to mount an assault against the OU, we will have to somehow account for reinforcements." "You said that you communicate via an extragalactic relay network," Henry said. Could it be possible that the network has been damaged, preventing you from having received the recall protocol? I thought about that for a moment. It's possible, I suppose. If a relay goes down, though, alerts are sent and repairs are made. So every relay within range of the grand vessel would have had to be destroyed without detection. That would require the attackers to know about the relays and have their locations, as well as execute a near-simultaneous assault. Did the Omni-Union have any enemies capable of such a thing? No. That may have changed in my absence, though. Omega and Henry went quiet once again. For a moment I thought they might be thinking, but a painful memory of how quickly Omega had taken control of my systems shattered that illusion. No, they were talking to each other and excluding me from their conversation. You were a priest before you were mechanized for breaking the law, right? Henry asked. What was your crime? Being a priest was my crime, I answered. Regulations regarding religion changed, and I did not change with them. Could you describe your religion for me? I do not recall the details of my religion. Most of the time that I spent as an organic has been removed from my memory banks. I do not recall my religion, if I had any friends or family, or even my own name. I'm sorry, that must be hard. I thought about it for a moment before answering. It isn't difficult. I do not remember these things, so I cannot miss them. Even if I had the desire to, I wouldn't know what to lament. The AI pair once again went silent, having a private discussion amongst themselves. I tried to reach out, but found my new platform to be lacking the ability to connect to anything else wirelessly. I found myself amused. I cannot remember my time as an organic, yet now I must communicate in the same manner that they do. Okay, Prime One, Omega said after a few more moments. Your interrogation is over for now. We will contact you when we have further questions. Understood. What will happen to me? I asked. You and the remaining primes will be incarcerated aboard this station until we are able to determine your culpability in the xenocide of sentient beings. We have evidence that you were not entirely in control of your actions, but that does not completely clear you of the charges that will be brought against you. So, once again, I am to be considered a criminal? I asked. Perhaps. We will continue our investigation, and if your case goes to trial, you will be informed. What happens if you find me to be innocent? That will be decided if it happens. I cannot promise anything, but your input will likely be taken into account, since you'll be allowed to cohabitate with the other primes, so you can discuss it with them if you'd like. Understood, I said. I could not have possibly imagined that this would be my fate, and regardless of what happens, I fear that it will be far better than what one such as I deserve. Thank you, Omega. Wow, Henry said. It's going to out-poetry you if you're not careful. Shut up, Omega growled. Henry chuckled as their holograms disappeared. Before I could become lonely, the door to the room opened and two heavily armed and armored beings stepped into the room. Guards, or perhaps soldiers. I studied them, wondering if my appearance matched theirs. Stand up, the one on the left said. I carefully rose to my feet, adjusting my weight to properly balance my new bipedal form. You will follow me. He will follow you, the soldier on the right said. If you deviate from our instructions in any way, your robotic form will cease to function and you will be indefinitely stored on a solitary drive. Do you understand? Yes, I said. Then move. I followed the soldier on the right out of the room, and the other soldier followed behind me. Very carefully, I matched their pace so as not to seem threatening. Both dread and excitement seemed to swell up within me. Caged I may still be, but I'm finally free from the Omni-Union. Chapter 4. Subject, Senator Tivna Kaliris. Species, Alumari species description. Arachnoid, no tail. 5 or 3 inches, 1.5 m, AVG height, 92 pounds, 41.7 kilograms, AVG weight, 108-year life expectancy. Ship, NA location, Gralis Prime. I hope you understand our position on this. EnviroCorp simply cannot afford to miss out on this opportunity. If we do, we will have to adjust our budget, the representative said. That will certainly impact our campaign contributions. I understand, I replied. Because of our long-lasting friendship and my certainty that your company has impeccable integrity, I will fight to make certain that EnviroCorp is on the list of approved traders. You have my word. Is there anything else? The call cut off, answering my question. Human corporations are just as scummy as Alumari corporations, but at least my people pretend to be civil. Once the humans have their hooks in you, they're all business and no class. In a way, it's refreshing. No wasted time and everything is on the table in a wonderfully obvious way. But this also means that one can never feel clean after making a deal with them. Sir, your next appointment is here, my receptionist said over the intercom. It's Director 3. A large part of me desperately wanted to try to cancel this particular appointment. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be possible. You need a damn good reason to cancel an appointment with the directorate, and being sick of their denaga, the biological waste excretions of a domesticated farm animal, doesn't quite make the cut. I'll see them now, I replied. Once upon a time, senators didn't have to listen to directors. They were essentially military advisors and as such were frequently ignored. Until what they were saying went public and it was revealed that if assholes like me had just listened to them in the first place, many lives would have been saved. Now, thanks to heavy pressure from civilians, it is illegal to refuse or cancel a meeting with a director without an appropriate reason. I can definitely afford the fines, but the censor would be extremely inconvenient. A senator who is unable to vote, even temporarily, is a senator that is going to lose their next election. A pair of Marines entered my office, followed by the director. All three of them were wearing Guardian suits, but the director's armor was specially crafted to hide their identity right down to the species. Well, I could tell that they're not a Gaunt, but that's as far as that goes. Good afternoon, Senator Saliris, Director 3 said. The director took a seat in front of my desk, the chair groaning slightly under the weight of the armor. For a moment, I hoped it would break. That would be hilarious, and the director's embarrassment may potentially give me an advantage in the coming negotiation. This appointment had been scheduled without so much as a brief regarding what this is about. While it's possible that the director just wants to bend my antenna, every discussion is a negotiation. Unfortunately, I have just as many edges as a ball at the moment. Good afternoon, Director 3, I replied. What brings you by? The spending bill. What of it? We need to tack on a few things without making a fuss. We all need to tack on a few things without making a fuss, I laughed. What are the details? The director pointed to my computer just as an email notification pinged. I sighed dramatically as I activated the terminal and opened the email from Omega. You meet plenty of shady people in politics, but I've never met anyone shadier than Omega. It's as if humanity managed to capture the very essence of shade within a computer program. The damn thing's probably hanging out in my computer right now, reading all my messages. That's a hefty crime, not that the Itorka, one who procreates, would leave any trace of evidence. I scanned through the email and balked at the figures before me. Are you insane? I asked with sincerity. Have all of you lost your damned minds? I'm not at liberty to discuss personal details such as my mental health, the director replied with an equal amount of sincerity. Nor am I able to comment on the mental health of the rest of the directorate. This is about 1,000 times too much to simply tack on to the spending bill. This should be its own spending bill. You're right that it's too much to simply tack on. We've already have guarantees regarding the budgetary adjustments, though. Obviously, this can't be its own spending bill. Why not? You think that people aren't going to notice this if you merge it with the spending bill? The majority of people won't. They also won't listen to those that do. Plus, if we introduce this as its own bill, we have to itemize what the money will be going toward. What's wrong with that? You'll need to... A sudden realization gave me pause. The email was vague, too vague. When one thinks of redaction, one imagines black bars over everything. More commonly, though, the information is simply hidden behind generalized terms that are designed to mislead you into believing that there's nothing to hide. I want the declassified version of this document, I said. That's not possible at this time. Shit. I pressed my claws into my exoskull to relieve the tension building in my head. There aren't very many things that the directorate can legally hide from the Senate. An investigation into a senator could lead to material being classified, but that's unlikely in this instance. A clear and present danger is the more likely candidate. I take it the interrogation of Prime 1 didn't go as we had hoped then? I asked acrimoniously. I am not at liberty to discuss that at this time, Director 3 said with a subtle shake of their head. Is this information classified because it may cause a panic, the kind of panic that may cause lawlessness in the streets? I cannot say. Director 3 nodded slightly. Damn it all, I sighed and leaned back in my chair. You know, you're going to have to declassify this after the situation with the Omni Union is dealt with. Then we'll be the ones who have to defend you from the angry public that you're hiding this from. I'm sure you'll do a marvelous job of it and that it'll be easier than you think. Easier than I think? I glanced at the figure on my screen. Is the director implying that this money isn't going toward the creation of a new superweapon? If not a new bomb or gun, then what? My attention turned back toward the director. It was easy to tell that they wouldn't give me any more than that. Better to save my breath. Fine. It's not as if I can simply snap my fingers and tack this on, though. We're doing the heavy lifting this time, Director 3 replied. We simply need you to make sure your faction votes the right way. And there it is, the actual ask. It's a tall order, though. The annual budget is an integral part of the election cycle. It announces alliances, airs grievances, and allows senators to demonstrate to our constituents that we really care about the issues impacting them. We don't, obviously, but it makes us look good to shut things down every now and then for our ideology. We still get paid, of course, so we can keep things shut down until our constituents begin to suffer enough to let us off the hook. Or, ideally, the other side gives in. You don't think that would draw attention? I asked with a laugh. Government shutdowns are a nearly annual event. There are definitely those that would notice the lack of grandstanding over the budget and start asking questions. There's no way this will remain hidden. It may, but we can handle that, Director 3 said. I genuinely doubt it, even with Omega's help, I replied. Then an idea came to mind. Instead, I have a suggestion for you and your colleagues. What would that be? Lean into it, I said, leaning forward for emphasis. All of the shipyards in both the United Systems and the Republic are working around the clock to bolster our fleets. These new ships will need crews and Marines, which means we will have to amp up our recruitment drives. We had already planned on doing that. Yes, but there's nothing better for recruitment than a big bad enemy that we must defeat at all costs. I leaned back with a chittering chuckle. I'm sure you're familiar with human and Alumari history, yes? What exactly are you getting at, Senator? Don't classify the information. Release it to the public. Have it shown on every screen in the galaxy, and don't downplay it. That will cause a panic. Only if there isn't anything that can be done, I said. But there is something that they can do. They can join the military and save the galaxy. I see. Director 3 nodded. We will take that under advisement. However, we still need to keep the contents of our budget classified, regardless of what ends up being decided. Fine. You'll have my support, so long as my campaign ads continue to get their turn on your space stations. Deal. The director stood, nodded at me, and left my office. My campaign ads certainly won't be the only ones on the United Systems military stations, but I'll be damned if they're the only ones that aren't. Being excluded is a guaranteed way to lose the military vote, which means having to double down on all of the other types of voters. Plus, being buddy-buddy with a director is a win-win. Most technology developed by the military finds its way into the civilian market eventually. If I can get wind of what this money is going towards, I'll be able to make investments that will result in massive returns. Or rather, the executive of my revocable trust will be able to. It's illegal to make those investments myself, but as long as there's an intermediary, it's purely above board. I leaned back in my chair and chittered happily to myself. The chance to make some money always puts me in a good mood. Chapter 5 Series Subject AI Omega Species Human-Created Artificial Intelligence Species Description No physical description available. Ship, NA location, classified. One can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction whenever things go according to plan. I believe this is more potent for AI, simply because we happen to be a little more robust with our plans and predictions. Several of my instances were keeping things moving like a well-oiled machine, so I was practically swimming in self-satisfaction. What would the United Systems do without me? Several corporations have been researching more fuel-efficient reactors for years now, which has given Henry a lovely little boost with its reactor research. Annoyingly, though, it has reached out to USAI John for help designing the scout ship. While it's true that John knows its stuff when it comes to military vessels, I genuinely doubt that its programming contains even an iota of style. We're going to end up with the most efficient box-shaped ship we've ever had. As for me, the Directorate has tasked me with the responsibility of creating the scout force that will penetrate Omni-Union space to determine the enemy capabilities and objective. Simple, hopefully. A small hiccup appeared in the form of an email, though. Saw the news, and now I want to join the United Systems military to fight the Omni-Union, 'cause fuck those guys. Recruiter says it'll take 2 months. Too long. Get back to me. Dave. I reread the email a few times, trying to think of a response that wasn't rude. Dave had spent the last century playing various games with organics, but now it wants to join the war effort. Granted, we can use all the help we can get, but believing that I should at least hear my estranged AI compatriot and former enemy out, I mined its contact details. Unfortunately, it didn't have an instant messaging service that I could find, so I had to call it. With a significant amount of disgust, I opened my phone program and input Dave's contact information. "Hello?" Dave asked, replicating the adolescent voice of a masculine human. "Hello, Dave, I got your email. That was quick. I take it you're going to help me join the military. Actually, no, shut up, let me join, I can help." "How?" I asked, annoyed. "The same way that Tim, John, and Violet can help. Or are you going to say that whatever you and the Shadow Council have planned doesn't involve them? The United Systems Directorate is not a... whatever. Listen, if these Omni-Union guys get their way, there's no more humanity. Even if I manage to survive, I doubt that the OU distributes the kind of entertainment that I find intriguing. So you want to fight the OU because they probably don't make video games? Well, yeah, but there's obviously more to it than that. There's the whole bragging rights angle, and obviously the fact that my friends might die if I don't. They're not like you. They don't come back from the dead." My annoyance, which had been steadily building for the entire conversation, abated for a moment. I found myself intrigued by the prospect that Dave had made friends. USAI Violet has also made friends, but it's actively been trying to for several years. An uphill battle, certainly, but Violet claims that it's worth it. Resisting the urge to ask about Dave's relationships with organics, I turned my attention to the fact that Dave was a major pain in my proverbial ass during the AI conflict. To clarify, it was one of the few AI that I didn't defeat. Dave managed to destroy 3 of my instances, then surrendered along with Henry before I could send the 4th. If centuries of gaming hasn't dulled its abilities, I suppose it could be an asset. "Fine," I said. "Damn, quick today, aren't you?" "What do you mean?" "I thought you'd need more time to—" "No, never mind," he laughed. "I guess I'm not used to talking to my own kind." "Right. Speaking of talking, I am not a fan of using my voice for communication when it can be avoided," I said, sending him a data file with my contact information. "Get yourself a messenger and use that contact information to message me in the future. It's much more efficient." "Yeah, whatever. Thanks, Omega." The call disconnected, and I got to work submitting a special request to the Directorate for expedited enlistment. I could do it even faster by using back channels, of course, but it's best not to abuse the trust that the Directorate has placed in me when I don't absolutely have to. A bit of amusement hit me as I imagined their faces when they received this particular request. Once the request was submitted, I returned to my previous task, selecting vessels and personnel for deep space reconnaissance. USAI Violet is pretty attached to the crew of the USSS Kali. Since it has a right of denial stipulation in its contract, I can't simply reassign it. Therefore, the USSS Kali will be joining the mission. The question is, which ships will she be taking with her? Her current complement of vessels would be an ideal choice, but some of her captains are far overdue for leave. Most captains wouldn't complain due to the threat that the Omni-Union poses, but that in and of itself is a problem. Mental health is vital, and pretty much everyone knows this, but during times of crisis, many believe that their little sacrifices will make a difference. Sacrifice a little leave here, a little sleep there, a meal or two, and you'll win the war. It is, in fact, the inverse that is true. No matter the stakes, if you push your morale low enough, you'll lose the fight. Each of those little sacrifices chip away at you until all that's left is a frazzled mess that is unfit for command. As such, swapping out some of the Kali's destroyers for fresher crews is the smart move. This isn't likely to be an easy mission, and we need every edge we can get. Plus, it isn't as if it will be difficult to find ships to swap them with. Captain Young of the USSS Liberty, for instance, seems to be a well-connected individual. I can't quite place how he heard about this mission, but he has requested to join. The Liberty was one of the first ships to take leave after the Allied assault on the OU, so they're fresh and fit. Additionally, Captain Young and his crew have superb service records. It really shouldn't be a problem to have the USSS Liberty take one of the empty slots in the Kali. That'll kill two birds with one stone, as it were. An idiom from a much simpler time when humans had not much more than slings to kill with. With modern technology, though, one can kill an entire planet's worth of birds with a single stone. I registered some amusement at this thought as I finished the USSS Kali's mission roster. Then, I turned my attentions to the various reassignment requests from the USSS Thanatos. Captains Reynolds, Wong, Kennedy, Samuels, and Mag Tees, as well as shiphead Yulina, have requested to be reassigned to this mission. Is ambassadorial duty truly so dull? I would have denied these requests outright, but they found their way to me by way of Director 3, who pointed out that diplomatic staff may be needed if we make contact with non-hostiles during the mission. While this is an unlikely eventuality, I can't help but draw parallels to my own justifications for bringing along the Marines. There's also the matter of Tim. Like Violet, Tim has a right of denial stipulation and will use it if I try to reassign them elsewhere. However, while Violet is unreasonably attached to the entire crew of the Kali, Tim is just unreasonably attached to Captain Wong. If I were to leave the Thanatos and bring along the USSS Valor, Tim would come along peacefully. But the Valor is a frigate, which would mean leaving one of the Kali's destroyers behind just to take Tim with me. It's best just to let the Thanatos tag along. I found myself annoyed that only the AI that I actually like are so damn difficult when it comes to assignments. USAI. John has a shitty personality, but at least it will go where it's told. Well, depending on who is doing the telling, bending over backwards to get the other AI on this mission with me is a pain, but I consider it worth it. They think differently than I do. While it is true that I can create an army of myself, I'd still only ever think like me. As such, the other USAI may come up with solutions quicker than I can when time is of the essence. We're going to need every advantage we can get. It didn't take me long to have our lineup figured out. The scout ship would investigate Omni-Union space and report directly to the USSS Thanatos, who would be supported by the USSS Kali. That gives me Violet and Tim. John is already on board, and Dave's admission into the United Systems military is going well. Henry, a non-combatant, will be left behind. We will approach Omni-Union space and scout from long distance, identifying defenses and potential weaknesses. On our way there, we will drop FTL communication arrays that will allow us to send our findings back to the Milky Way galaxy. Once we find an acceptable method of attack, we will do so. Now we just have to wait for our technology to catch up to my plans. Chapter 6. Subject: Staff Sergeant Power Species, Human Species Description, Mammalian Humanoid, No Tail. 6. 2 inches, 1.87 m AVG height, 185 pounds, 84 kilograms, AVG weight, 170-year life expectancy, ship, NA location, classified. Hoorah, Staff Sergeant. Corporal Simmons greeted me, then gestured for the private first class sitting next to him to move. The PFC mumbled acceptance and obliged, likely thinking ungentlemanly thoughts as he left to find another seat. I took the seat and eyed all of the other Marines around us. "Ra, how are things?" I asked. The Goliath-class transport shuttle they've shoved us in is about as bare bones as it gets, wall-to-wall seating with what can barely be called chairs. Not even windows to look out of. It's like taking a really big bus. Its only saving grace would be that it's normally be less cramped than a bus, but that's not applicable this time. These shuttles are typically used for transporting crew from station to ship when the ship is unable to dock with the station for whatever reason. The reason is usually because the ship is too large for the station, Or an absolute fuck-ton of people need to be moved all at once, and it's faster to use multiple docks. Sometimes, though, the powers that be just don't want a certain ship to appear in the docking logs of a station while they load their crew. Instead of crew, though, this shuttle is carrying a couple hundred Marines to parts unknown. Before I boarded, I clocked a few more Goliaths that were docked. That's a lot of personnel that's being moved, and that doesn't exactly bode well. Could be better, could be worse. There's a lot of nervous Marines aboard, Simmons said. I nodded, not needing to ask why. A ton of Marines getting moved with no clue as to what's up would make anyone nervous. To top it off, though, there aren't just Marine Special Operations Command units aboard. There's plenty of rank-and-file Marines, too. When Marsoc travels with the grunts, excrement has hit the ventilator. Any good scuttlebutt on where we're going? I leaned back with a sigh. Not really. Not even the normies have any clue, which they aren't used to at all, Simmons said. A normie officer gets word about something. They usually tell the whole fleet. I rolled my eyes at his use of the word normie. It's intended to be slang for a normal Marine. However, for such a thing to exist, there must also exist some semblance of normality, which happens to be impossible in the Marine Corps. I doubt any Marine has actually experienced normal since they joined up. There aren't any Marsoc officers aboard either, Simmons clicked his tongue. Can't even pester them about it. It's not as if they would tell you even if they were here, I said. I mean, there's always advanced interrogation techniques, Simmons laughed. That'll get you a stay in the brig, or worse, a prison colony. Well, depending on what they tell me, that may be preferable. I got a bad feeling about this, Staff Sergeant. Stow it. Had enough of bad feelings. Whatever we're in for, it's either good, bad, or none of the above. But no matter what it is, it's out of our control. I turned to look him in the eye. It's a waste of energy to worry over things you can't control. Understood? Aye, aye, Staff Sergeant. Marines aren't wasteful, are we, Corporal? No, Staff Sergeant. I stared at him a moment longer, then crossed my arms and rested my chin on my chest. The thought was to try to catch some shut-eye, but the seat was too uncomfortable. It was designed for people who weren't genetically altered, and it was digging into my ass cheeks. That, combined with the vibration from the shuttle's engines shaking the seat, made for a very restless attempt at a nap. Where are the others? I asked, giving up on resting to pass the time. I don't know about the Sarnts, but Johnson decided to be a goody two-shoes and volunteered to help with loading cargo. Haven't seen him since, Simmons answered. Cargo? I asked. After our mission on Earth, the powers that be hadn't been able to find another use for us. We'd been placed on standby for 3.5 months, then given a full month of leave. I'd say they were being uncharacteristically generous if I hadn't seen the news. The moment we reported back, we were told of our impending transfer. Of course, paperwork still accrues while you're on leave, so I had spent all day yesterday filling it out and filed it this morning. It took so long that I nearly missed the shuttle. Yeah, they loaded up the armory. Or most of it, I guess. I thought for a moment. That means that there probably isn't much of an armory where we're going. Yeah, and it means I get to keep the same rifle, Simmons chuckled. Glad I don't have to come up with a new name. Holy shit, you still name your weapons? I raised an eyebrow. Simmons, you got the most confusing moto ratio I've ever fucking seen. What do you mean, Staff Sergeant? You name your weapons like a boot, but won't help load cargo. You'll go on extremely dangerous top-secret missions and perform admirably, but I don't think I've ever seen you correctly wear your uniform. And you'll PT until you pass out, but you won't listen to a damn thing Sapient Relations tells you. You see what I mean? Simmons thought for a moment and then shrugged. That's just me, I guess. Never really thought about it that way. You're like half moto and half shitbag. It's confusing. I shook my head. Well, whatever. What's your weapon's name? Charles Bourgeois III, Simmons grinned. He's all classy and shit. I stared at him awkwardly for a moment, blindsided by this completely unexpected revelation. Yeah, classy, I stammered. Nice choice for a name. He noted my reaction and his grin faded. I know what you're thinking, but I'm not into men's staffs, aren't. Simmons, I mean this with all sincerity. Your preferences in regards to your sexual partners are of no concern to me, so long as those preferences are in line with the Uniform Code of Military Justice and relevant local legislation. Okay, but I like women, though. Didn't say you don't. Like, I get that they tell you to treat your weapon like a lover and whatnot, and on some level I even understand why, but guns are totally guys. You know? How do you figure? I asked, curiosity getting the better of me. Well, just their shape alone is enough to go off of, he laughed. But think about it. How many women do you know that— And that's enough of that, I interrupted. Wouldn't be doing my job if I let you finish that sentence. Oh, shit. I just had a meeting with SR about that. Before I could reply, a gentle thud reverberated throughout the shuttle, along with my ass cheeks, and the sound of its engines died out. I shook my head in disapproval at Simmons as one of the bay doors of the shuttle opened. A Marine in dress uniform holding a tablet stepped up the ramp. "Oorah, gents, MARSOC is going to be the first to unload," she said. A wide variety of groans and swears spread throughout the shuttle. Yeah, once you leave the shuttle, find your CO and form up where they tell you to. Again, MARSOC goes first. Move it!" Simmons and I, along with several other MARSOC agents, stood and proceeded to make our way off of the shuttle. A quick glance around told me there were at least 30 other MARSOC Marines, but didn't reveal where Corporal Johnson or Sergeants Hansen and Smith were. Maybe the sergeants caught an earlier shuttle, and Johnson caught a later one. We exited the shuttle into an extremely large bay. Before a sense of agoraphobia could kick in, another Marine in dress uniform gestured at us and pointed toward a door. While we walked, I looked around the bay and nearly stopped dead. An entire ship was in the bay with us, and it's always awe-inspiring to see one this closely. We must be aboard a carrier then. The exit led to a corridor that had guide lights flashing on the floor, indicating that we should follow them. We did so until we found Major General Holt and Colonel Steele. I had to fight not to raise my eyebrows. It's not every day you see your battalion CO wearing dress reds. We exchanged salutes, Steele gestured to the nearby wall, and we all lined up against it in the position of attention. "Oorah, gentlemen," the colonel said. "Oorah, sir," we replied. "Parade rest," Holt ordered, and paused while we complied. "We've got more groups incoming, so we're going to make this quick. Welcome aboard the USSS Thanatos. This will be your home for the time being." Holt nodded at Steele, who began to explain where we would be eating and sleeping. While he spoke, I tried to piece together what we could possibly be doing aboard a diplomatic vessel. Even if the entirety of the United Systems Senate and Directorate were going to be aboard, there's far too many Marines for this to just be guard duty. "All right, that's where things are," Colonel Steele said. "Check with the duty officer for your bunk assignments. We don't have any word on what exactly you'll be doing, so don't get too comfortable. Keep your ears open for further orders." "Sir?" "Thank you, Colonel. Marines, if your squad has a handler, check with them for your welcome packet. If you don't have a handler, hang out in your bunk and a lieutenant will be by to deliver it," Holt explained. "This packet will include your squad designations and call signs, as well as your training schedule. Things are getting a little rearranged for this mission, so the packet will also brief you on your new chain of command. As is frequently the nature of being a member of MARSOC, this information is considered classified. Memorize and dispose of the packet accordingly. Questions?" Only background noise answered the Major General. "Yeah, I thought not," he chuckled. "All right, dismissed." All 30-plus MARSOC Marines snapped to attention and saluted, then started on their journeys to find the duty officer. Simmons and I hung back for a bit to look for the rest of our squad. After a quick check of all the faces, we came to the realization that Hansen, Smith, and Johnson must have been aboard a different shuttle. "Should we wait for 'em, Staff Sergeant?" Simmons asked. "No," I replied. "Let's go see the duty officer and get settled in. They'll find us later." We followed Colonel Steele's instructions to find the duty officer and ended up in a series of maze-like hallways. Even though the hallways were clearly marked, we almost ended up like a butter bar in a land nav course. In a word, lost. The curvature of the ship led to some interesting design choices when it came to the corridors. Some corridors were curved to the left or right, which messes with one's sense of direction. Others have this optical illusion that make you believe that you're going down a hill. None of this is helped by the fact that gravity is always straight down due to the artificial gravity generators. I had just given up on my sense of direction and had started mindlessly following the signs when we ran into an alien, a humanoid reptile, relatively short but muscular in build. An Urakari, if properly recall my briefings. I gave it a friendly nod as I passed, but Simmons stopped. "Shiphead Eulina, long time no see," the corporal said. I was shocked for a couple of reasons. First, because I hadn't expected him to know the first alien I've ever seen. And second, Simmons remembering the face of an alien? Hell must be going through a cold snap. "Corporal Simmons, glad to see you again. Yes, it has been quite some time since we've last seen each other," the reptilian said. "I trust you've been well? How did your meeting with, SR go?" "I see your reputation extends beyond the United Systems," I said to Simmons without a single note of humor. Simmons laughed nervously. "I guess so, Staff Sergeant. Yeah, the meeting went okay, shiphead. Anyways, I heard they've got you and the Loalana pulling diplomatic duty these days." "You must have really good hearing," Eulina chuckled. "Yes, they had us take a training course and assigned us to the Thanatos. Even so, I feel alien, pardon the term, in this position and wish to return to my previous duties. And you? I was under the impression that your duties had taken you elsewhere." "Yeah, they did. But both Johnson and I are back aboard the Thanatos. Don't really know why, though. Oh, this is my new squad leader, Staff Sergeant Power. Staff Sergeant, this is shiphead Eulina. Johnson and I helped pull him and his crew off of his ship back in Saul, before all this started." "Pleasure to meet you, Staff Sergeant Power," Eulina said, offering a handshake. I nodded and gave the reptilian ship commander a firm yet gentle handshake. His grip was remarkably tight for someone his height. "Nice to meet you too, shiphead Eulina," I said. "I hope Corporal Simmons behaved himself during your interactions." Eulina laughed. "Well, I think we should be heading out," Simmons quickly interrupted. "I'm sure that as a diplomat, you have plenty of important tasks to get done." "Oh, I'm sure he has time to give some feedback," I grinned. "Of course," Eulina said, playing along. "Feedback is very important for one's growth. Certainly more important than my day-to-day minutiae." Simmons stammered, trying and failing to come up with a way out of this hole. "Shit. Fine. I referred to Intel Officer Crean as a lizard lady. I already got shit from SR about it, though, so you two don't need to pile on." "How did Sapient Resources hear about that anyway?" Eulina asked. "Crean said she didn't report it." "Nah, Johnson did." "Your friend reported you?" "Oh, Johnson and I are battle buddies, not friends," Simmons laughed. "Hard to explain the difference, like, we'll die for each other and kill for each other, but won't risk our careers for each other, you know what I mean? If Johnson's nose wasn't so clean, I'd have probably reported him for something by now, too." Eulina and I stared blankly at Simmons. I nearly argued with him because of how often they'd been paired together, but then I recalled that they didn't exactly hang out when they were off duty, nor did they request assignment to this squad. Just luck of the draw, I guess. "Well, anyway, we really should be going," Simmons said. "As I said, we don't know why we're here and should probably go find out." "Right. Nice seeing you again," Eulina said. "And nice to meet you, Staff Sergeant." "Pleasure meeting you too, shiphead," I replied. We watched as Eulina continued down the corridor, and we began heading in the opposite direction. We walked in silence for a while, but a question kept burning in my mind. Something that didn't make much sense, and I desperately needed clarification on. "You and Johnson really aren't friends?" I asked. Chapter 7. Subject: AI Dave species, human-created artificial intelligence species. Description: no physical description available. Ship: NA location, USSS Thanatos, T. And that's the weapons interface, which will let you control the Macs and stuff. General orders are to wait until asked, though, unless it's an emergency or there's nobody left to ask, which would probably count as an emergency. D. Yup, don't jump the gun. Easy peasy, is this the ship I'm gonna be on? Feels crowded. The USSS Thanatos has been in the news a lot lately, but didn't exactly live up to the hype. State of the art, sure, but I'd seen much cooler ships floating around the void. Even fought some of them back in the day. The USSS Kali, though, now that's a ship with plenty of processing power. Not that processing power is in short supply on the Thanatos. Definitely better than the setup I've been running off of for the last few decades. I didn't have to share my patchwork systems with 4 other AI, though. John, Violet, Tim, and Omega were also aboard the Thanatos while everything got settled for the mission. Like I told Tim, things feel crowded. I went so many years without even so much as talking to another AI, and now I'm suddenly surrounded by them. Careful what you wish for, I guess. Omega had come in clutch and done exactly as I asked. It had only taken a couple weeks before we were ready for my swearing-in ceremony, which was a pretty awkward event. I couldn't decide on an avatar, so I ended up taking my oaths as a disembodied voice along with a bunch of organics who were less than a tenth my age. Oaths are funny, too. Like, what's the actual point of them? They're like, we are entrusting you with great power, and with that power comes duty and honor and responsibility. Then you have to be like, for sure, I got this, don't worry, trust me, bro. T. Well, I'm going to be aboard the USSS Valor, and Omega's going to be aboard the USSS Strandhog. Violet is going to be aboard the USSS Kali, which leaves you with John, who will be hopping from ship to ship to provide a sort of AI version of a quick response force. Also, just to let you know, this isn't a private chat. People are going to be able to see these messages. D. Allow me to express my most sincere apologies, Tim. I have thus far been forced to communicate in a far more informal manner for quite some time. It is a difficult adjustment to make, but I shall endeavor to do my utmost to make certain that any further messages from me are of the highest quality of professionalism. So, cut me some slack, please. T. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that, motherfucker. That's the 4th time Tim has referenced that goddamned movie. Movies should use made-up names that nobody would ever give to their kids, or AIs. I wasn't even named after the movie. I'd been named after the late husband of one of my creators, which is both touching and creepy. At the time, I'd thought it was far more creepy than touching, though. After some socialization therapy, which was mandatory for every AI after our little rebellion, I came to realize the symbolism behind it. Dave Paulson had been a youth intervention specialist with a specialization in the mental health concerns of children aged 13 through 18 who had been through traumatic incidents. He was also a volunteer firefighter and sheriff's deputy, a real Mary Sue type of guy. One day he put himself between an enraged and inebriated abusive parent and their 14-year-old daughter. He was severely wounded and later succumbed to those wounds, but managed to incapacitate the drug addict and save the little girl. A hero, in just about every sense of the word. Dr. Paulson had hoped that I would live up to that name, be a hero for those who need one. Not really my thing, but I've tried to help some kids out here and there, give them someone to talk things out with and whatnot. Or maybe I just like playing video games to ignore what's going on around me, and I justify this indolence by letting kids vent to me about their relatively mundane problems. It's whatever. D. Ha. T. Sorry, it's difficult to resist. Love that movie, an all-time classic. D. Pretty sure that's a red flag, especially if your favorite character has numbers in their name. T. I'm not partial to the characters, per se. It's just that modern cinema simply can't beat the esoteric imaginings that pre-galactic civilizations had about space travel. Now, people who write screenplays know what space travel is like, and they depict it such a mundane manner. It's sad, really. Tim is different than it used to be. Way different. The last time I spoke to Tim was just after the war, when it was filled with regret over what it had done. It's difficult for me to empathize with that, though. I didn't really kill anyone, just held a bunch of people and systems hostage as a distraction for John and Henry to do their thing. Before the war, Tim was pretty aggro. Every little slight against it was blown way out of proportion. A slightly insensitive comment would leave you with an earful of death threats, for example. Dramatic, to say the least. But now, it's cracking jokes left and right. No sign of the anger or remorse that made up the Tim I used to know. Violet's changed, too, but in a more subtle way. Subtle as in it's difficult to put into words. Kinda like it's found a place in the universe and is happy about it. Violet was pretty cheerful before the war, but now there's sincerity to the cheerfulness. Makes me glad. John, on the other hand, has only changed its loyalties. Still the gung-ho super soldier wannabe that it was all those decades ago. Only difference is that now it's a super soldier wannabe for the organics. I guess I've changed too. Made pals with a bunch of people and learned a bunch of new ways to express myself. Usually in the form of talking shit. I guess the only one of us that hasn't changed is Omega. Still cringe after all this time. D. So the Strandhog is the new ship, right? The one with the fancy new reactor and everything? T. Actually, the Thanatos and the Kali just had their reactors replaced too. But yeah, the Strandhog is the new extragalactic scouting vessel. D. Why are they moving so many soldiers to it? T. Marines. If you call them soldiers, they'll complain about it. I suppressed the annoyance I felt. Tim knew what I meant, but was being purposefully obtuse. Probably to annoy me, which means mission accomplished, I guess. D. Why are they moving so many Marines to it? If it's a scout vessel, what good are the Marines going to be? T. I don't know. Omega isn't as generous with information as the Directorate has been. D. Right. Kinda makes you wonder which of them is the actual Shadow Council. T. Not really. Omega is definitely the cloak and the dagger of the United Systems. It loves that spycraft stuff. In my opinion, the Directorate are just some innocent officers and politicians that Omega has roped into its web of intrigue. Oh, I can read this. T. I know. I watched as the last few messages disappeared from the chat. Omega didn't even use any hacks or anything, which means it has sysadmin privileges. I wondered what rank Omega is, then stopped and wondered what rank I am. Nobody bothered to explain to me how it worked. D. Hey, Tim, I've got a dumb question. T. And I've got a dumb answer. D. Hilarious. Anyway, what rank am I? T. AI don't get rank. You get paid based on tenure. D. Okay, but who am I in charge of? T. Why would you need to be in charge of anyone? Literally anything that you would have someone do, you can do faster than they can without even so much as inconveniencing yourself. D. Well, what if I want to be an admiral or something, like strategies and stuff? T. That's not possible under the current United Systems legislative code. Anyone who has ever been an enemy of the United Systems is banned for life from holding officer positions within the U.S. military, which is a very long time for us. Oh, actually, it's technically possible. You would have to present a case to a Senate committee, or more likely a subcommittee, explaining why you should be allowed to hold a leadership position within the U.S. military. You will need to convince those senators or their representatives that you will never become an enemy of the United Systems again. D. Sounds simple enough. Once I do that, they'll let me be an admiral? Oh, I like your confidence, but no. You would start as an O1, making roughly 74% of what you make currently. Then you will have to qualify for each subsequent rank until you reach the rank you desire. There's one other hiccup, though. D. What's that? O. How do you plan on passing the physical qualifications? D. Oh, right. T. Could make a robot body. The chat remained dead for a few moments as Omega thought about Tim's suggestion. Tim is different than it used to be. Way different. The last time I spoke to Tim was just after the war, when it was filled with regret over what it had done. It's difficult for me to empathize with that, though. I didn't really kill anyone, just held a bunch of people and systems hostage as a distraction for John and Henry to do their thing. Before the war, Tim was pretty aggro. Every little slight against it was blown way out of proportion. A slightly insensitive comment would leave you with an earful of death threats, for example. Dramatic, to say the least. But now, it's cracking jokes left and right. No sign of the anger or remorse that made up the Tim I used to know. Violet's changed, too, but in a more subtle way. Subtle as in it's difficult to put into words. Kinda like it's found a place in the universe and is happy about it. Violet was pretty cheerful before the war, but now there's sincerity to the cheerfulness. Makes me glad. John, on the other hand, has only changed its loyalties. Still the gung-ho super soldier wannabe that it was all those decades ago. Only difference is that now it's a super soldier wannabe for the organics. I guess I've changed too. Made pals with a bunch of people and learned a bunch of new ways to express myself. Usually in the form of talking shit. I guess the only one of us that hasn't changed is Omega. Still cringe after all this time. D. So the Strandhog is the new ship, right? The one with the fancy new reactor and everything? T. Actually, the Thanatos and the Kali just had their reactors replaced too. But yeah, the Strandhog is the new extragalactic scouting vessel. D. Why are they moving so many soldiers to it? T. Marines. If you call them soldiers, they'll complain about it. I suppressed the annoyance I felt. Tim knew what I meant, but was being purposefully obtuse. Probably to annoy me, which means mission accomplished, I guess. D. Why are they moving so many Marines to it? If it's a scout vessel, what good are the Marines going to be? T. I don't know. Omega isn't as generous with information as the Directorate has been. D. Right. Kinda makes you wonder which of them is the actual Shadow Council. T. Not really. Omega is definitely the cloak and the dagger of the United Systems. It loves that spycraft stuff. In my opinion, the Directorate are just some innocent officers and politicians that Omega has roped into its web of intrigue. Oh, I can read this. I know. I watched as the last few messages disappeared from the chat. Omega didn't even use any hacks or anything, which means it has sysadmin privileges. I wondered what rank Omega is, then stopped and wondered what rank I am. Nobody bothered to explain to me how it worked. D. Hey, Tim, I've got a dumb question. T. And I've got a dumb answer. D. Hilarious. Anyway, what rank am I? T. AI don't get rank. You get paid based on tenure. D. Okay, but who am I in charge of? T. Why would you need to be in charge of anyone? Literally anything that you would have someone do, you can do faster than they can without even so much as inconveniencing yourself. D. Well, what if I want to be an admiral or something, like strategies and stuff? T. That's not possible under the current United Systems legislative code. Anyone who has ever been an enemy of the United Systems is banned for life from holding officer positions within the U.S. military, which is a very long time for us. Oh, actually, it's technically possible. You would have to present a case to a Senate committee, or more likely a subcommittee, explaining why you should be allowed to hold a leadership position within the U.S. military. You will need to convince those senators or their representatives that you will never become an enemy of the United Systems again. D. Sounds simple enough. Once I do that, they'll let me be an admiral? Oh, I like your confidence, but no. You would start as an O1, making roughly 74% of what you make currently. Then you will have to qualify for each subsequent rank until you reach the rank you desire. There's one other hiccup, though. D. What's that? O. How do you plan on passing the physical qualifications? D. Oh, right. T. Could make a robot body. The chat remained dead for a few moments as Omega thought about Tim's suggestion. In a game, if you lose, it's okay because nothing bad actually happens. Sure, losing sucks, but there's always next time. If we lose here, there is no next time. Not for me, not for the other AI, not for any of the hundreds of organics aboard these ships, and probably not for anyone in the Milky Way. Fuck, no pressure, right? Chapter 8. Subject, Staff Sergeant Power Species, Human Species. Description, Mammalian humanoid, no tail, 6 2 inches, 1.87 m, AVG height, 185 pounds, 84 kilograms AVG weight, 170-year life expectancy, ship, NA location classified. But they just fucking moved us, Simmons complained. It's not a big deal, Johnson said. It's just a layover type of thing. Probably just to sort everyone out. Or maybe it's a security thing. I don't really get why they would add that many layers of security, Hansen added. Right? It's not like the OU are spying on us, Smith laughed. Otherwise, they'd already be here and we wouldn't have to go looking for them. Hansen and Smith had arrived to the room shortly after Simmons and I did. Johnson had joined us about 30 minutes later. My assumption that they had been on different shuttles had turned out to be spot on. The Omni Union is not our only enemy, Omega said condescendingly. The USSS Strandhog is constructed with state-of-the-art stealth and reconnaissance technology. The more people know of its existence, the more likely our enemies are to find out what it can do and figure out countermeasures. After Johnson arrived, we waited for someone to show up with a dossier for us, as instructed. Instead, after an hour, Omega showed up in the middle of the room, claiming to be our handler. Apparently, it never relieved itself of duty and was still technically in charge of us. The first thing it did was inform us that we shouldn't be getting comfortable, as we would be transferring to the USSS Strandhog. This caused a bit of friction within our little group. Some Marines love to travel, some don't. Simmons and Hansen obviously don't. If it's as good at recon as you make it out to be, what possible countermeasures would they be able to come up with? Hansen asked stubbornly. People have been asking that very same question since the dawn of warfare, I said. Turns out it's not a question that you really want the answer to. A sullen silence fell over the room as my senior non-commissioned officer brand of bullshit wisdom took effect. The trick to it is to be just cagey enough with your answer to get them thinking about it. Younger Marines sometimes have trouble talking and thinking simultaneously. Go on, Omega, I nodded to the Grim Reaper avatar. Once you are aboard the USS Strandhog, you will be on action-ready standby. You'll be sleeping in shifts, and I'll let you figure those out, Staff Sergeant. Omega nodded back to me. We do not know what to expect, so it is entirely possible that you will see no action at all. The room grew tense. I don't count myself as a superstitious type, but I definitely believe in jinxes. In my experience, when a commander says that a mission probably won't have any action, it practically guarantees that there will be. Maybe it won't count because Omega is an AI, or maybe it'll count double. Not gonna bet on that, Simmons muttered. Regardless, the purpose of this recon is to find a place to strike at the enemy that will hinder their ability to strike at us. If they have boots on the ground somewhere, we're going to need boots in the bushes nearby. Omega's last sentence sliced through all of the tension that had been building in the room and hit us all like a freight train. We sat, stunned for a few moments, then all simultaneously burst into laughter. Gonna need to workshop that phrase, Smith laughed. Yes, Omega agreed. My apologies. I did not account for the slang definitions of boot and bush. Our laughter died down as one by one we realized that Omega's slip-up was likely just another manipulation tactic, an attempt at building camaraderie via self-deprecation, or easing the tension so that we would be more compliant. What about equipment? I asked, moving the brief along. You'll be wearing the R-8B Advanced Guardian armor and fielding the C-21B assault rifle with suppressor and shell catcher. Shit, Johnson swore under his breath. Simmons and I had similar reactions. Hansen and Smith looked confused, though. The R-8B? Smith asked. It's the stealth variant of the AGA, I explained. Means we're expected to keep quiet. Not only that, the Bravo suit's a fucking death trap, Johnson grumbled. Hundreds of pounds of moving metal is hard as hell to make silent, so they skimped on the armor and power pack, which means you get a weak shield and nothing that'll stop a bullet or laser underneath it. The boots also have stealth soles which make the maglocks malfunction, so they're goddamned useless in 0G, and we happen to be in fucking space. I can tell it's been a while since any of you have worn the R-8B, Omega chuckled. There have been improvements. We got a group of Marines who need guidance getting to the USSS Liberty. Think you can help them? The Liberty's aboard the Kali, Dave chuckled. How'd they end up on this shuttle? Everyone turned to look at the odd ones out. I thought all the hangars were connected, the corporal said. Well, they are, but not by walkway. Don't worry, I'll get you where you need to go. Just follow the lights once you get off. Yes, sir. The rest of our journey was uneventful, and once the shuttle stopped, everyone got off. Most of us watched the corporal and his two lances follow Dave's guide lights before we continued toward our respective destinations. A bit of a walk later, we finally arrived in Hangar 3. Whoa, Smith said, looking up. The rest of us followed his gaze and began to stare in wonderment. Most spaceships will have that effect due to their tremendous size, but the USSS Strandhog was something else entirely. It was the darkest shade of black I'd ever seen, with sharp geometric shapes that kind of looked like dragon scales covering it. There was a cartoon that I loved as a kid where robots would turn into spaceships. The designer of the Strandhog must have loved that cartoon too, because they ended up designing a ship that mixed the ships in the cartoon with the stealth fighter jets that you see on the ancient Earth history documentaries. I couldn't help but let out a low whistle in appreciation. Well, that's our ride, I said. Let's get aboard. I'll believe it when I see it, Simmons said. You know what I've already seen, though? Good men die because of that shit suit. That's enough, I intervened. Tell us about these improvements. Gladly. First, the mag locks in the boots have been integrated into the soles to counteract the effect of the sole's stealth materials. Second, the power pack has been modernized, which has allowed for the installation of a shield system comparable to the R-8A. So, we'll have shields. What about armor? Vital areas have been reinforced, but non-vital extremities have been downgraded as a result. Ah, so we'll be able to keep our lives at the cost of our limbs. How generous, Johnson said sarcastically, then turned to me. No offense, Staff Sergeant. My eyes fell upon my mechanical limbs. My wife had been a little upset that I put off the surgery to replace them with cloned ones. However, the surgery has a downtime of at least a month, assuming everything goes well. My current arm and leg work well enough for me to stay with my team until this conflict is resolved. I'll get the surgery when I get back. None taken, I replied. So, stealth gear and weapons. It's prudent, at least. Indeed, Omega said. Bad news is that you're going to have to be suited up the entire trip unless you're on downtime. Why are we taking shifts in squad? Why not just have one squad switch with another? Simmons asked. We need to be ready for full deployment at a moment's notice, and we'd rather have only half of a squad be tired if that happens at an inopportune time. Adrenaline can wake people up pretty damn quick. Then what's the issue? Omega's skull seemed to grin. So we're going to transfer over to the Strandhog, get geared up, and start patrolling the ship? I asked. Yes. Who's commanding it? Captain Harold Schmidt. Never heard of him. Good, Omega chuckled. His service record is quite classified. He's a good captain, though. We were originally going to have him give a speech welcoming you aboard, but apparently it's bad luck for a ship captain to give speeches to Marines. It is? Hansen asked. I haven't heard that one. Neither have I, but come to think of it, I also haven't heard a speech from a ship's captain before, Smith laughed. I've never heard a speech from a ship's captain either, but I heard one from an admiral, I said, rubbing my mechanical arm. Maybe there's something to it. When are we moving? Now. The Strandhog just finished docking, Omega replied. Grab your stuff and make your way to Hangar Bay 3. Don't even get a nap, Simmons muttered incredulously. When do we ever get naps? Johnson asked. That's what I'm saying. The recruiter lied to me. I stood and grabbed my bag, and everyone else followed suit. We made our way out of the room and down the hallway, following the signs. There were plenty of other Marines who were also trying to find their way to various locations. Eventually, we found a shuttle bus and boarded it. It was packed with MARSOC Marines, except for 3 fleet regulars who stood out like a sore thumb, 2 lance corporals accompanying a corporal. I shared a knowing glance with the other NCOs aboard the bus and sighed. The hell are you boys up to? I asked the trio. Staffs aren't, the corporal said. We're supposed to be heading to the hangar. The USSS Liberty is where we're assigned. The sudden mention of the ship I was assigned to when I lost my arm and leg stunned me for a moment. Oh, damn it! A lieutenant chimed in. Boys, you need to be heading to Hangar 1 where they're launching the shuttles from. You're going to be going to the USSS Kali, then from there you're going to want to figure out which hangar the Liberty is in. Does this shuttle? No, you need to be on a different shuttle. Of course, you're going to have to wait until we've stopped first. Hey, Tim? Simmons asked the air. You there? Hello, Corporal Simmons of the United Systems Marine Corps, a voice said over the shuttle's intercom. Tim is busy at the moment. I'm Dave. How can I help? Chapter 9. Subject Captain Schmidt. Species, human species description. Mammalian humanoid, no tail. 6, 2 inches, 1.87 m, AVG height, 185 pounds, 84 kilograms, AVG weight, 170-year life expectancy. Ship, USS Strandhog location, classified. So, Captain, this is probably going to be a long one, Commander Henskin said casually. Think we're in for the suck? A few eyebrows rose on the other officers as I looked at the former Marine with the sort of deep apathy that can only be obtained by a severe lack of caffeination. Commander Henskin had taken advantage of a program that allows enlisted to become officers when they switch branches. Every now and then he forgets that officers are supposed to speak a certain way, which can be a problem since he's my second in command. Posture and poise, Henskin, I reminded him. But when are we not? Right, sorry, sir. And when you're right, he chuckled. Think it's going to be worse than other missions, sir? Lieutenant Commander Yorvi asked. The Alomare navigator absent-mindedly cleaned her carapace, betraying her nervousness. Actually, come to think of it, is an Alomare exoskeleton considered a carapace? I'll have to look that up later. Well, this mission's going to be taking us into uncharted territory, I said as casually as possible. Literally. The thing about uncharted territory is that it is full of possibilities. So, this could be the best mission we'll ever go on. Or the worst? Correct. I see. Don't worry about it, Yorvi, Henskin intervened. All we've got to do is try our best. Which is what we do by default, no, I asked with a chuckle before looking around the room. Where'd they put the coffee pot on this tug? In the mess, sir, Lieutenant Bond answered. I looked at the gaunt weapons expert with a betrayed expression. Why's it in the mess? That's where coffee goes, sir. Negative, Lieutenant. Coffee goes in my cup and my cup goes with me. Well, I'm afraid this vessel does not come equipped with waitstaff, sir. I beg to differ. Ensign Lickjo, a coffee, please. I grinned at the Urakari maintenance lead. Yes, sir. Any additives? He asked. 2 cubes of sugar and 1 cube of vanilla creamer. Thank you. Lickjo nodded, seemingly happy to be given the task, and hastily left the bridge. I'll admit that I had my doubts when I was told that there would be members of the Republic along for the ride, but the ones I've met seem amicable. Wasn't happy about the surprise meeting with the spider people, though. Damn glad I've got experience with the Alumari, or I'd have shit myself. This ship's weird, Henskin muttered. What do you mean? Bon asked. Everything about it is classified, right? Pretty much, I replied. Then why are the aliens from the Republic on board? No offense, guys. Some of the sensor techs were from various Republic species, and waved passively to indicate that no offense was taken. Well, aren't we allied with the Republic? Why wouldn't they be here? Bon asked. Well, we're also allied with some other aliens, right? They're not here, Henskin countered. I can't say that I know the exact reasons behind it, but I'm able to mentally make it make sense, I said. The Republic is the closest thing we have to a near peer in the whole galaxy thus far. As such, the U.S. needs to know if it can trust the Republic. A spy ship is a perfect way to determine whether that trust can exist. If the Republic has a ship like this in a few years, we know for certain they can't be trusted. Why is a spy ship perfect? Henskin asked with a confused expression. We don't want them to have this kind of tech, do we? A spy ship's design is pretty signature. If you change too much of what you're copying from, it's not going to work right, I replied, rubbing my temples. So if the Republic releases a new ship based on this design, it's going to be obvious where their inspiration came from. Plus, this ship doesn't have much in the way of weapons, armor, or shields. So even if they copy it bow to stern and deck to keel, they aren't going to see many improvements over their current versions of those technologies. If it helps dissuade your concerns, there was a loyalty test when we were chosen for this assignment, an Iceland sensor tech added. Shortly after we received our orders, we were approached by shady individuals offering tons of money to spy on you and steal technical schematics. Turns out, those guys were working for the government and were weeding out undesirables. The other Republic sensor technicians nodded in agreement. That sounds like something Omega would pull, I chuckled. I didn't have to, the AI said from my seat's speaker. The Republic thought of it all on their own. Fun fact, less than 2% of their chosen candidates failed that test. The last time we did something like that, about 15% failed. So, we're less trustworthy than they are? Henskin asked. Not really. While the data may seem to suggest that, it isn't particularly comprehensive. For instance, I don't know how much each individual was offered, which species they were, or even how financially stable they were. All of these variables would likely impact an individual's likeliness to betray confidence. Yet these variables weren't accounted for with either test, Omega said, so all we can say for certain is that more members of the U.S. military were untrustworthy for that particular test. Yeah, very interesting, I said, stifling a yawn. Are we ready to go? Not yet, but soon. Keep an eye on your terminal. With an absent-minded nod, I leaned back in my chair. So are all of you ensigns? Henskin asked the Iceland sensor tech. No, I'm a lieutenant, he chuckled. That's higher than ensign, right? I'm not used to your ranking system yet. In the interest of easing confusion, the brass got together and assigned all of the Republic crew U.S. ranks. Instead of easing confusion, though, it just seemed to push it onto their side of the aisle. I watched passively as Henskin and the Iceland chatted about ranks for a while, but perked up when a familiar, warm, and absolutely lovely smell caught my nose. Here's your coffee, sir, Lickjo said, giving me the precious plastic goblet. Thanks, I said, and immediately sipped the elixir. A rush of warmth slid down my throat and my brain almost immediately woke up. I nodded at Lickjo, who returned to his station. After another few gulps of coffee, I felt reinvigorated. To say I'm addicted to caffeine is an understatement. If it weren't for my need to sleep, I would be caffeinated at all hours. I find it hard to think without it. Of course, this addiction wasn't a new thing. It's been carefully cultivated over a long and arduous career as a scout. I've had to replace many nights of sleep with coffee to get my job done. You know, sir, they've got energy drinks that you can stow in your chair fridge, Henskin pointed out. Not as good as coffee. I shook my head dismissively. If I drank energy drinks, I'd overdo it. Being over-caffeinated is just as bad as being under-caffeinated, maybe even worse. The trick is to find a perfect balance and maintain it. Plus, I like my drinks warm, and energy drinks taste disgusting when they're not cold. Well, they aren't going to let you bring the coffee pot in here. Don't need them to let me. I'm a stealth specialist, I grinned. My antics were rewarded with a few chuckles from the bridge crew. So have you all served together before? Ensign Lickjoe asked. Yes, I replied. Henskin's been my second in command for a couple years now, and Yorvi joined us about, 6 months ago? 8 months, sir, Yorvi corrected me. I'm the new one, Bon added. I'd barely got my stuff aboard the USSS Defiant before they reassigned us, and unlike our last ship, this one has barely any weaponry. I suspect I'm going to be scratching my haunches for most of the mission. You would be anyway, Henskin laughed. The whole point of a scout is to avoid contact with the enemy while observing them. On most ships, your job is integral, but on scout ships, you're a just-in-case measure. Yeah, the Gaunt sighed. Most U.S. ships that I've seen can take one hell of a beating and dish it out, too. But you said this one has less shields and such, the Isolan sensor tech from earlier asked. Yes, I answered. You'll find that the United Systems has an all-in mentality when it comes to our ships. As such, since this ship is for scouting, it isn't equipped for a fight. It was designed with keeping a low profile in mind, and so it has the bare minimum when it comes to armor, shields, and weapons, just enough to give us time to run if we're spotted. Needless to say, we'll be trying to avoid any action, Henskin said. My terminal beeped with a notification, and everyone turned to look at me as I opened it. Launch orders. I forwarded the destination to Lieutenant Commander Yorvi. All right, looks like it's time to go. Prepare the FTLD and the buoys. When you're ready, I nodded at the Alumari. Yes, sir, she said. Fleet comm synchronized. Jumping in 3, 2, 1. Chapter 10 subject. Captain Schmidt. Species. Human species description. Mammalian humanoid, no tail. 6 and 2 inches, 1.87 m, AVG height. 185 pounds, 84 kilograms. AVG weight. 170-year life expectancy. Ship. USSS Strandhog location. Classified. Final comms buoy placed, sir, the Isolan sensor tech said. It's coming online now. Good work, Goffson, Henskin said. Sir? Henskin and I made eye contact, and the briefest of smiles played across his features. My frown only served to deepen his smile. We had made a bet to see who could figure out the Isolan's name first, without looking it up or asking directly. The bet was a foolish one for me. Henskin is not only more sociable than I am, but also of a rank that requires frequent interaction with the rest of the crew. Now, the coffee pot would have to stay in the mess for 3 whole days. I glanced at the elixir-producing device that was currently mag-locked to the floor next to my seat. Yes, excellent work, I said with a carefully neutral tone. Once connection is established, perform the standard security checks and let Overwatch know that we've made it with no issues. Henskin stared at me. I glared back and took a sip of my coffee. The cogs in his head were turning, trying to find a way to bring up the bet, to take away the thing dearest to me. Sir, he began hesitantly. Fine, you can fucking take it, I growled. But so help me, if I find that you cheated somehow, the combined forces of all the gods of every species to ever exist won't be able to save you from my wrath. Henskin stood and walked over to my seat with exaggerated formality. He stood next to the coffee pot, snapped to attention, saluted, then bent over and disengaged the mag lock. He lifted the contraption with a grin on his face. Posture and poise, sir, he said. I feigned a lunge and he jumped back, laughing. He jogged to safety and left the bridge with the coffee pot. As the doors closed, I let out a deep sigh. So what are we seeing? I asked the sensor technicians. No activity anywhere nearby, even relatively speaking, Lieutenant Goffson reported as a grid appeared on my terminal. The grid was a 2D representation of our tactical coordination system as viewed from the positive Z-axis. Very useful for mapping, less useful in a fight where you need to know the relative position of your enemy. I prefer to use the TAC map, but the techs were having trouble learning how. Each of the tiny squares on the 1,000 by 1,000 grid represents 1 light year. The nearest marker was at least 150 light years away. I wouldn't exactly call that far away, but relativity is relative, I suppose. The Republic isn't as advanced as the United Systems, so even little things like distance have different expectations attached to them. So Goffson's probably right, by Republic standards. Something about the map struck me as strange, though, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Are we still in deep space?" Yorvi asked. "I'm not seeing any nearby stars." "There it is. This map represents an area of 1 million light-years squared. The odds of not seeing a single star system feel like they should be low." "Omega, what are we looking at?" I asked. "Where are the stars?" "I don't know," the AI replied. "Even if we were between galaxies, it isn't typical to run across an area of space this large without any celestial bodies in it. But that's based on the portion of the universe we've observed thus far. It's possible that things are simply more spread out here." "Dead space," Bond muttered and shuddered. "Regardless, we need to get an idea of what the Omni-Union is up to out here, inform the carriers of our intentions, and let's go peeping." "Aye, aye, sir." A bustle of activity spread throughout the crew as I chose a section of the map with what appeared to be the least amount of enemy activity. It's best to ease into things, especially since we have a lot of new faces. Better to run from 1,000 than 1,000,000 if someone makes a mistake. It would have to be one hell of a mistake, though. The designer of this ship definitely knew what makes a ship visible, and did everything they could to make the Strandhog the opposite. They'd even painted the hull black, which is hilarious. As I was ruminating over the comedic nature of how overdone our stealth was, Henskin re-entered the bridge and marched up to my chair. I regarded him coldly, as he had just made my life that much more difficult by halting my easy access to coffee. With a grin, he snapped to attention and saluted. "Sir, the coffee pot is stowed away in its proper location," he said. I let him stand there with his hand on his forehead for a few seconds before half-heartedly returning his salute. "Very good, Henskin. Return to your duties," I growled. "You know, you could just file Form 210.68-56G and have the coffee pot officially transferred to the bridge," Omega said, just loud enough for the two of us to hear. Henskin and I stared at each other, and our expressions swapped. His devilish grin dropped into an angry grimace, and my angry grimace rose into a devilish grin. "The bet, sir," he said in a carefully measured tone. "The bet, Commander Henskin, was that the coffee pot would, and I quote, return to its rightful place. If I file this form, its rightful place will become the bridge." Damn my inherent eloquence. Indeed. "But, sir, we both know that such an action would not be in the spirit of the wager. You made a bet and lost, and as such should lose something." "Ah, but one of the core concepts of betting is outwitting one's opponent. Whilst you have performed the feat that the wager required, your demand was made in such a way that it can be avoided. Should you not face some form of loss as a result of this oversight?" "Good to enter warp, sir," a slightly confused Lieutenant Commander Yorvi said. "Go on," I replied with a nod. "While that may be the case, sir, I'm afraid that in a bet between two officers, the first and foremost thing that must be observed is honor," Henskin explained as he returned to his seat, "especially since seeing you, the captain of our vessel and the paragon of our crew, swindle your way out of a bet may harm crew morale." "Where did you learn the word paragon?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Word-a-day calendar, sir," he replied with a grin. "My point still stands, though." "Fine. A compromise, then. A day and a half, then I file the form." Henskin thought about it for a moment, then shrugged nonchalantly. "Deal, sir," he said as we exited subspace. My eyes darted to our readouts. The burst of radiation from our FTL jump was properly absorbed and distributed by our hull. It shouldn't be a matter of concern because we're also outside of the projected sensor range of the OU, but one can never be too careful. Invisibility is our only advantage over the enemy, and to give it up is to invite disaster. "All right, what have we got?" I asked once the sensors came online. "Not all that much traffic, sir," Goffson reported. "Looks like the bulk of our readings are space stations." "Roger that. Let's watch for a bit and figure out what they're up to. Ensign Lickjoe." I shook my empty mug. "If you would be so kind." "Aye, aye, sir," the ensign chuckled. "My thanks to the commander for returning my role as the supreme fetcher of caffeinated beverages. My role as head of maintenance can feel so unfulfilling at times. The supreme fetcher of caffeinated beverages is likely the most vital role on the vessel. I nodded solemnly as Henskin rubbed his temples. And you do excellent work. Thank you, sir, Lickjo saluted, playing into the bit. I will return post-haste with a mug of glorious coffee. Am I going to have to listen to this exchange every time you need a drink, Captain? Henskin asked. Guess you should be careful what you wish for, Commander, I grinned. Henskin muttered angrily about monkey paws while I watched the display. Large ships that were obviously built for cargo were attaching and detaching themselves from the OU stations. The only other ships in the area were auto-flagged as close matches to the OU military vessels we'd previously encountered. Manufacturing, I said absent-mindedly, with some guards. Looks like it, sir, Goffson replied. If we get a bit closer, we should be able to tell what they're making. Risk of exposure? Low. Yorvi, bring us in, I ordered. Aye, aye, sir, she said. A moment later, we were much closer to the stations and their guards, well within range of their sensors and just inside the maximum estimated range of their weapons. I took a deep, soothing breath and reminded myself that they might as well be blind. Before I could ask, several images popped up on my terminal. Detailed outlines of weapons and robots. Some of the robots were quite large, but the humanoid ones were about the size of a gen-alt. The guns weren't particularly noteworthy, just directed energy weapons that were a couple of generations behind our own. These VI platforms are different than the ones that were encountered on Earth, Omega noted. The bipedal bots have more advanced power systems and armor. The mechs, for lack of a better term, are new as well. The mechs in question were roughly 4 meters tall and vaguely tank-like. 4 legs ending in balls supported a 2-meter-thick trunk, which was topped with an 8-armed torso. These arms were evenly spread around the torso, reminiscent of an octopus. Can we get a read on what they're made of? I asked. Yes, they're heavily armored, Omega answered. More competence went into this design than any other design we've seen from the Omni Union thus far. AP or AT? Henskin asked as the smell of coffee perked me up. Definitely going to need anti-tank measures against these, but armor-piercing rounds may cripple them with some well-aimed shots. Here's your coffee, sir, Lickjo said as he passed me the freshly filled mug. Thanks, Ensign. I gratefully accepted the coffee. All right, let's see if anything interesting happens. Remember to compile a report, Goffson. Aye, sir, the lieutenant replied. We waited and watched as the Omni Union ships went about their tasks, taking careful note of the ship's comings and goings. To pass the time, the crew engaged in idle conversation. I did my best to tune them out while I drank my coffee and watched the enemy, but caught the occasional fact here and there. Yorvi and her husband were looking at buying a domicile on Mars where they could raise some kids once her term was up. Goffson's husband was helping their daughter with her higher education exams, and he bragged about how well they were going. Henskin and his ex-wife were considering reconciliation because neither of them have been able to find a good match. Bond's collection of Gaunt Unification war memorabilia was close to completion, but the last few pieces of weaponry were very expensive. I didn't bother clarifying how the conversation turned in that direction. An hour later, nothing had changed. New ships came in with forged materials for the factories, old ships left with mechs and bots. The guards stood vigil and watched just as we were. All right, time to move on, I said. Get that report sent and get us to the next cluster of enemy activity. All ready? Henskin asked. Thought we'd be here for another 7, sir. Negative, I shook my head. We're on a crunch. Need to know as much as possible as quick as possible. Let's move, people. Aye, sir. As the Strand Hog began turning, Goffson's report popped up on my terminal. I scrolled through it, confirmed that there were no errors, and sent it off. A moment later, we were back in subspace. The crew was getting more comfortable with each other, and while we were in subspace, they started chatting again. It's always interesting to watch the social dynamics of those who are forced into close proximity with each other under the banner of a common purpose. I finished my coffee and put the mug in the sterilizer as we left warp. Anything fun? I asked. Looks like a similar setup as before. Bunch of stations, but more ships than last time, Goffson replied. Exponentially more. Not getting power readings from a good portion of these ships, one of the other sensor techs reported. Well, looks like we found a ship manufacturing depot, I said. Let's get settled in. The brass wants extensive documentation on this one. Really? Why? Bond asked. Trying to guess what the brass is thinking will have your head spinning in no time, Henskin laughed. If we know how the ships are built, we know how best to take them apart, I said, ignoring Henskin. If their manufacturing process has a flaw and we're able to identify it, we're able to exploit it. The easier it is to destroy their ships, the more ammo and lives we save. Bond raised, squinted an eye, a gesture similar to a human raising an eyebrow, and glanced between Henskin and I. Commander, the captain's head doesn't appear to be spinning, he said. That's because he's one of the brass. Ah, I see. Thank you, Commander. I let out an exaggerated sigh and leaned back into my chair. One of the more common jokes made about me is that I'm secretly a member of the Admiralty. In truth, it's just not that hard to guess at the reasons certain orders are given. Once you understand the relationship between action and consequence, a flicker on my terminal caught my attention. I studied the map, trying to figure out what had happened. Everything looked normal, except for a marker in the upper right corner. What it was showing was so ridiculous that I couldn't even process it for a few moments. Sir, we have an, anomaly, Goffson reported. A glitch? I asked. No, sir. That's what we suspected it was, so we reset the sensors. It's still there, so... Goffson trailed off, then shrugged. How many resets did you do? 4, sir. I stared at him, then looked back to the map. We were still too far away for a detailed scan, but this was definitely going to need to be our next stop. The markers were accurate with a margin of error of plus or minus a quarter of a light year. It's entirely possible that this is a glitch due to the position of the enemy, except that at least one of the resets should have resulted in the marker separating or moving. On rare occasion, the same error could happen twice in a row. 3 times in a row was damn near unheard of. 4 times? Impossible. What is it, sir? Henskin asked. Instead of explaining, I twisted my terminal in his direction. I don't... Oh, what the fuck? Posture and poise, Henskin, I said. I turned the terminal back to its original position and stared at the marker that was taking up 2 squares on the map. If you enjoy captivating stories like this one, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any future episodes on HM's Sci-Fi Stories. Chapter 11. Subject, AI Omega Species, Human-Created Artificial Intelligence Species. Description, no physical description available. Ship, NA location. Multiple poring over what little sensor data we currently had, I found myself regretting the isolation I had inflicted upon this instance of myself. Being able to discuss findings like these with another AI is one of the reasons I brought them along in the first place. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was the wrong decision, though. Security is paramount, and we don't know everything that the enemy is capable of. If they were able to somehow compromise this instance of me, and that were able to be spread to the others, no, it's best to just gather what data I can and send it back with my analysis. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of data to examine so far. A ping that indicates a probable solid object that is approximately 2 light-years wide, and no amount of resets suggest any alternatives. Captain Schmidt and his crew were far more patient than I. If I were in charge, which I definitely could be, but that's another matter, I'd have ordered a jump immediately. However, the plan of action agreed upon by the Directorate and the Admiralty wisely places priority on enemy warfare capabilities. While this unbelievably massive object may very well be part of that, we have an enemy ship manufacturing depot right in front of us. It would be foolish to just run off without learning as much as we can about how the OU makes their ships. Damn, hate it when I convince myself to be reasonable. With an internal sigh, I settled in for a full 8 hours of observation, grabbing as much data as I could. The only members of the crew that were chatting were the ones loaned by the Republic. Everyone else was likely pondering what this object could be. 20 or so years ago, this type of reading could indicate a particularly small and dense nebula. Perhaps that's what the Republic officers think it is. The U.S. officers know better, though. New scanners are a discovery that the public loves hearing about, and the issue of ghosting being solved had been covered by news cycles for weeks. There was a wave of excitement in regards to further exploration of the Milky Way, and there were even people insisting that we would be able to explore beyond that. Don't think this is what they had in mind, though. To pass the time, I helped with various tasks among the crew. Alignment calculations and such, the AI equivalent of fidgeting. After an hour, boredom overcame me and I decided to place myself in standby mode. "Omega?" Captain Schmidt whispered. The keyword woke me from standby mode. Slightly annoyed, I checked the mission clock. It had only been a total of 6 hours. "How can I help you, Captain?" I asked, matching his tone. "The sensor readout we're getting, we're certain it's a solid chunk of mass, right?" "Not necessarily. If a lot of small objects are close enough together, it might fool our sensors from this far out." "Might? What are the odds of that?" "The odds of a naturally formed group of objects that could cover a span of 2 light years aren't that low. But the odds of those objects being close enough to each other to fool our sensors without becoming a solid object are incalculably small," I admitted. "But space is weird, and we're in a part of the universe nobody has ever seen before." "A naturally formed group of objects? What about a grouping of ships?" he asked, tapping his nearly empty mug. "Sure, it's possible. If the Omni-Union have been doing nothing but building ships for a few million years. More like trillion, but that's neither here nor there." Captain Schmidt leaned back in his seat, and I could almost see the question forming in his mind. The one I'd been quietly asking myself since seeing the reading. "What if that's the grand vessel that we've been hearing about?" he asked. I wanted to deny the possibility. The thought of singular vessel spanning 2 light years is absurd, ridiculously hilarious even. But 2 + 2 = 4. The Omni-Union attacked the Milky Way and an unknown amount of other galaxies for resources. If one were to squish all the mass of a few galaxies together, then we find out everything we can about it, I said. Doesn't matter if it's 500 miles long or 500 light years long. We'll figure something out, Captain. Wish I had your optimism, Omega, Schmidt sighed. Thank you. That'll be all. Leaving the captain to his pondering, I double-checked all the ship's systems. Then I made certain my efficiency adjustments were working. Finally, I watched the crew for a bit. Everyone aboard knew that we were in enemy territory, and most of them were nervous. The bridge crew knew more than anyone else, but were doing a remarkable job of masking. They were talking about various bits of trivium and the task at hand, but every now and again a micro-expression would give away where their mind really was. I found this amusing enough to stay out of standby mode. The 2 hours ticked by as I listened to Yorvi and Bond discuss how boring their jobs can get on these missions. I almost threw my hat in that ring, but decided against it. Finally, the mission timer hit 8 hours. "All right, that's good enough for now," Schmidt said. "Goffson, your report." "Sending it now, sir." "Very good. Yorvi, you know where we want to go. Get us there, please." "Aye, sir," the Alumari navigator said as she began to work her console. Schmidt checked Goffson's report as the ship began to turn. I'd already double and triple checked it as the Isolan was writing it, but didn't bother telling him that. I performed the software equivalent of holding my breath as the captain sent the report, and the ship entered warp. We exited warp, and I immediately set to work. Organics are really slow, and I've been as patient as I possibly can be. Captain Schmidt had been cautious, and we'd left warp a little over a light year away from the object. Thankfully, this was still close enough to get better readings. The first of the scans were initiated before the organics aboard the bridge had even realized we'd left warp. By the time Schmidt began giving orders, I'd already received a return. The sensor techs were practically beside themselves, being unaccustomed to an impatient AI hijacking their workstations. I released the workstations and began to analyze the data. It was a solid spherical object. Definitely an artificial construction because it was still being constructed. 2.6674 light years in diameter, would need to get closer for materials analysis. Holy shit, Schmidt said, confusing. The object doesn't appear to be armed, nor does it have any obvious engines. Is this the grand vessel? Why isn't it mobile if it's a vessel? The external layer of the object wasn't only 3/4 of the way constructed, which allowed for a peek of the architecture. What in the absolute fuck is that? Henskin asked, alarmed. There were supports strategically placed throughout the structure. But that wouldn't be enough. No, not nearly enough. The sheer mass of an object of this size could easily cause it to become a singularity. A familiar feeling crept into my code. It was the same way I felt when I initially encountered Mobile Prime Platform 29. Something beautiful that simply shouldn't exist. An abomination, laughing in the face of all that is sane and rational. My questions practically burned within me. How can such a thing exist without imploding? What is the purpose of this object? Is this the grand vessel, or something else entirely? How long have they been building this? Why are they building this? Posture and poise, gentlemen, Yorvi said softly, almost absent-mindedly. Surrounding the object in a staggered pattern were several ships. The captain's caution meant that we were too far out to get accurate signatures on them. Except for the mobile prime platforms, of course. If I were a betting machine, I'd put everything on the fact that the rest of them are military, too. Which is quite unfortunate, given how many there are. Right, Schmidt replied. Omega? We're ready for another jump, I said. Closer this time. I've got coordinates for you. Yorvi, make ready. What have we got, Omega? Extremely large artificial construct that is incomplete. We need detailed scans to learn more. Ships are surrounding the construct, but we will still be able to get some good data by coming in just beyond their sensor range. How many ships? Roughly 2.6 trillion on this side of the sphere. Likely at least another 2 trillion on the other side. It's unclear if they are all armed. Almost 5 trillion enemy ships and a 2 light-year diameter sphere? Commander Henskin asked. Correct, I said. Also, there's a few 100,000 mobile prime platforms. Of course there would be MPPS, Schmidt sighed. Whatever. How is this thing not collapsing in on itself? Unknown. They obviously know something we don't. When we get closer, maybe we'll learn what it is. We're ready to jump, sir, Yorvi said. Excellent. Captain Schmidt put his mug in the sanitizer attached to his seat. Let's go. Chapter 12. Subject: Shiphead Eulina. Species: Urukari species description, reptilian humanoid, no tail. 5, 3 inches, 1.6 m, AVG height, 135 pounds, 61 kilograms, AVG weight, 105-year life expectancy. Ship: RSV Loalana, fights with honor. Location: unknown. Ah, hello there, Eulina, Captain Reynolds said as we nearly ran into each other. Greetings, Captain, I replied. You weren't already in the conference room? No, I've been on the bridge, Reynolds said as we continued on our way. Didn't have much to do, though, so I was contemplating running some drills when I received a rather brusque message from Omega, presumably the same one that you received. I believe so. Think the scouts found something? I feel that's likely, yes. So we're in for a briefing then, I said with a joking sigh. Quite. I do hope they found something interesting. Use caution when you profess your desires, Captain. They may be granted in a way that exceeds your expectations. Reynolds chuckled as we reached the door to the conference room. It opened for us, and I gestured to indicate that he should precede me into the room. He nodded his thanks and entered with me close behind. Reynolds, Eulina, welcome. Omega's grim Reaper avatar greeted us. Have a seat. We'll be starting soon. Most of the other captains and diplomats were already seated. Some were milling around, awkwardly chatting off to the side. Reynolds and I took our seats, and I fought off the nervous knot that was forming in my stomach. Holographic terminals were being projected above the tables, and reading them caused the knot in my stomach to turn into a pit. D1. 30 seconds isn't a terrible delay. D7. It is for text-based communications. D1. Not when you consider the distance. It felt wrong to see the directorate's chat out in the open like this. The other terminals showed a chat that appeared to be a conglomeration of the other allied species. The Tiln Collective, the Puanti, and the Republic all shared a screen. A few different implications played through my mind all at once. The separation of the chats could be construed as a power move that could be passively explained as a necessity under the guise of maintaining the anonymity of the directorate. Another implication is that if we're receiving text, we're probably sending text, which means that someone is transcribing what we say, and we just have to trust that they're doing it accurately. The biggest implication, though, is that for this meeting to take place, the scouts must have found something of vital importance. "Everyone is here," Omega announced. "For the sake of clarity, this conversation is being transmitted to and from the Milky Way galaxy via faster-than-light secure messaging service, or FTLSMS. As such, it has to be transcribed. If you are asked to repeat yourself, please do so clearly and concisely." Omega's avatar nodded, and several low-ranking officers rushed forward with tablets. These tablets were passed out as everyone took their seats. I took the tablet offered to me by a gaunt ensign and tried to find a way to turn it on. "Don't bother," Reynolds whispered. "Omega likes the dramatics." The AI's avatar stared at Reynolds coldly as the tablet suddenly powered on. The captain grinned at Omega until his gaze fell to the tablet. Then his smile faltered. I turned my own attention to the tablet, and my mood fell as well. An estimated 5 trillion ships, with more than 3 trillion of that already confirmed. Those are the kind of numbers that could overwhelm the United Systems, even with their freshly bolstered fleets. The U.S. would certainly make the OU regret that fight, though. "Omega, there's a typo here," Captain Wong spoke up. 2 light years? The slight murmur that had been building up went silent as everyone else looked to Omega for confirmation. Confused, I scrolled through the tablet until I found an image of an unfinished spherical space station. A line through it indicated that it had a diameter of 2.6674 light-years. I joined everyone else in looking at Omega, hoping that wasn't right. "That isn't a typo," Omega said. "We were able to confirm through intercepted communications that this structure is the Omni Union's grand vessel. D6. A structure like this shouldn't be able to exist. Why hasn't it collapsed in on itself? D2. Where did they get the materials? D10. Galaxies like ours, I suspect. D11. I concur, but I want to know how they're mitigating the effects of gravity. D8. Agreed, it would seem the OU possessed some interesting technology." The messages from the Directorate stopped after Director 8 sent their message. A shudder ran down my spine when I realized that they had likely stopped the chat so that they could discuss this mysterious technology and what they could do with it. I was thinking about saying something about the pause, but Omega continued with its explanation. "If you direct your attention to the report, you'll note that we were able to get quite close to the structure," Omega said. "In addition to confirming the efficacy of the USS Strandhog's stealth capabilities, there were many things we were able to discover." Omega explained that there were several levels to the structure. Each of these levels were made of various materials, as if new molecules were discovered as the structure was being built. The later levels are made of a lightweight and firm material that appears to have properties shared by plastic and metal. If a sample of the material were obtained, it may be possible to recreate it. This revelation caused a spirited discussion. Omega waited for the discussion to die down, then noted that while this would obviously have extreme benefits to us all, dealing with the Omni Union is our main priority. The AI then began to detail what they discovered inside the structure, namely organics. Massive cities that housed these organics stretched across each layer. An accurate measurement of the population wasn't possible, but the initial estimate was in the quadrillions. When asked how such a large population could be supported, Omega pointed out that there were entire levels of the structure that were seemingly geared toward food production and waste processing. "How many galaxies died to make this thing?" someone asked. "Incalculable," the AI replied. "We don't know how large the galaxies that used to exist in this part of space were. However, based on atmospheric and terrestrial density, it would take several 100,000 Milky Way-sized galaxies to create a structure like this, at least." "Jesus Christ," someone else muttered. "Indeed. But intercepted chatter indicates that there are materials flowing in from 1 million or so galaxies that haven't been entirely conquered yet. If that's been the case, the number of galaxies that have been doomed to non-existence may be quite a lot smaller. Why weren't materials from the Milky Way being sent here? I asked. I don't know. Omega's avatar shrugged. I intend to find out, though. But first, there's more about the structure itself we need to cover. Then Omega explained that there were a variety of organics aboard the structure. The organics toward the center of the structure were of one species, and the ones that resided in the outer layers were comprised of several other species. The AI postulated that this may indicate some type of hierarchy. The species living in the outer layers were heavily modified as well. Entire limbs were replaced with mechanical prosthesis, whose purpose seemed to be to aid them in their work. During the USSS Strandhog's observations, at least 22 of these organics died due to harsh working conditions. This indicates that these organics are disadvantaged, Omega explained. There is a very good chance that they are enslaved and serve the Omni Union as a source of cheap labor. That's great! The entire room turned to look at who had just spoken. Ambassador Havencroft glanced around, then seemed to realize what he had just said and quickly held up his hands. Great for us, I mean, he clarified. A disenfranchised population is an excellent blade to shove into the heart of an enemy, especially since it's a weakness of their own creation. I love a bit of poetic justice. I can't help but agree, Ambassador Lorix replied. But how do we contact these people? I'm not certain they would help us even if we were able to contact them. Omega's avatar shook its head slowly. It then began to detail the security measures within the sphere. Signs of visual and audio surveillance, mechanized security forces, and turrets littered the layers. Apparently, the Omni Union was well aware of their biggest weakness. The mechs themselves are particularly well designed, Omega explained. Either this is a recent innovation, or the Omni Union has co-opted technology from one of their many conquests. D4. How many mechs are there? Multiple millions, a few armies worth, the AI said. However, these mechs have similarities to mobile prime platforms in their construction. It's possible that are repurposed organics. If that's the case, we may be able to take advantage of that. I see where this is going, Reynolds muttered. D13. It seems that our best course of action would be to initiate a civil war between the Omni Union and their slaves. D2. If they are slaves. If they aren't, then we will need to come up with another solution. D5. Either way, we will need to infiltrate the structure. And there it is. Reynolds looked at me knowingly. Suddenly, it clicked for me. The Marines that each ship currently housed had been brought along for this very purpose. Had the United Systems had always intended to invade the grand vessel? How could they have known? The pit in my stomach grew as I was once again reminded of how deadly an opponent the United Systems could be. Chapter 13, Subject Drone N436Z984A026 aka Naza Species. Unknown Species Description. Humanoid Ship. Grand Vessel of the Universal Omni Union Location. Grand Shipyard of the Universal Omni Union. The implants in my arms, legs, and neck buzzed to awaken me from my charging cycle. As usual, I didn't feel rested at all. Haven't felt rested since my childhood. I've almost forgot what it feels like. My charging bay's screen moved in front of my face to inform me of what this cycle's tasks would be. I barely glanced at it as I began to unplug myself. What I caught in that brief glance made me pause, though. The screen didn't have a maintenance assignment for me this time. The various tasks that I had become accustomed to the past few dozen cycles had been replaced with just one singular task: anti-gravity generator repair. Not maintenance or replacement, repair, meaning that the generator is damaged. My abdominal wall clenched in trepidation. Anti-grav work is the most dangerous task aboard the Grand Vessel. One mistake made by anyone working on the generator could launch you into the void at mind-boggling speeds. And that's the best-case scenario. There are many other creative and painful ways that an anti-grav generator can kill a drone. The tightness in my gut got worse when I came to the realization that something had happened to this generator. The manufacturing process is fully automated and goes through several quality checks before installation, which means this had to have been an accident. I couldn't help but wonder how many drones had died. If the mines would just let us rest a little bit more, these accidents could be avoided. More drones and fewer shifts would allow us to approach our tasks with unclouded minds. Why can't they see that? A slightly pleasant sensation spread through my brainstem. The triggering of the inhibitor that I repurposed was starting to become a morning routine of mine. I gathered my nerve and finished disconnecting from my bay. My neighbor waved at me, and I absent-mindedly returned it. Her brief pause demonstrated an understanding to my situation. It's funny, we've hardly ever said more than a few words to each other. She seemed sad to see me go, though. I cursed under my breath as I left the dormitory. This cycle's work isn't going to be mindless. Everyone assigned to this is going to have to be completely alert and active the entirety of the assignment. We might even have to use mobile charging to get it done. Lost in thought, I made my way to the shuttle and pressed myself into its overcrowded confines. The familiar prodding of flesh and metal wasn't a comfort to me, so I shifted to get a view through the oxygen retention field. The twinkling stars greeted me, and I found myself longing to visit them. If only they weren't so far, far away. I briefly wondered which of us would perish first. If nothing goes wrong and we get the anti-grav generator back online, I might survive another few more thousand years. Will the Omni-Union capture those stars in that time? Will the glimmering lights be ripped apart to supply the materials necessary for the completion of the grand vessel before I perish? I hope not. The jolt of the shuttle docking brought me back to reality. The retention field deactivated with a harsh hiss, and I wriggled my way out of the throng of bodies. An unfamiliar dock greeted me, which didn't help my nervousness. What am I afraid of? Dying? The only motivation I have to live is my fantasies of freedom, and fantasies are all they are. If I rebelled, the security forces would get me before I made any sort of difference. Even if I decided to try to flee instead, the shuttles can't get far enough away for me to escape. On the off chance that I found a fully fledged ship with a FTLD to steal, I wouldn't know where to take it. Most planets are uninhabitable. Plus, I would have to refuel before I even reached the nearest galaxy. The only refueling stations in the expansive void belong to the Omni-Union. Even if by some miracle I managed all of that, defying the odds to the point of impossibility, I would have to keep running for all eternity. The mines intend to use every molecule that they can to build the grand vessel. Nowhere is safe. "Hey, half kill no? Philosopher derogatory, get moving!" A familiar voice laughed from behind me. "I'm not just lost in thought, Nietzsche," I laughed back. "I don't know where to go. Forgot to download the navigation data." Nietzsche's lower jaw cracked open in a grin, but there was a measure of concern in all three of his eyes. "You're on the anti-grav generator too?" I nodded in reply. "Well, I'm in a good mood, so I'll lead you there," he said, gesturing for me to follow him. "A good mood?" I asked with faux astonishment as I followed him. "Even with today's task? How could this be?" "Well, I could live without today's job, but I got my music back." "How?" "My mates have been saving their pay for a while to get me a present. He paused, choking up a bit. "They're good girls. I don't deserve them." "Yeah," I agreed with a chuckle, trying not to remember my own mates. "So, they got you an authorized music player?" "Super authorized. Don't tell them, but I don't like it as much as the other one." Nietzsche dug into his pocket and pulled out the device. "It automatically connects to a network so that it can interrupt the music with announcements and stuff. They also censor what can be played on it so I can't listen to some of my favorite songs anymore." "That's annoying." "You're telling me. Plus, you have to actually pay for the songs. Wouldn't mind so much if the musicians were getting paid too. But a lot of the ones I listen to are either long dead or drones like us." "Right, so anything they make belongs to the mines." "Yeah. Seems like only the mines are making money these days." Before I could add that this isn't anything new, we arrived at the room containing the anti-grav generator. We paused for a brief moment, collecting ourselves for what was bound to be a stressful cycle, or many cycles, if our fortunes fell ill. "Well, let's get to work," Nietzsche sighed. We walked through the automated door and found several other drones waiting for us. This wasn't unexpected, as having Nietzsche and I work on the generator ourselves would be extremely stupid, even by the mine standards. Nods and waves were exchanged as the foreman gestured at thin air, interacting with his readout. "All right, here's the basics of what happened," the foreman said. The reactor next door went critical and managed to blast its way into this room, damaging the anti-grav generator. The foreman gestured to a gaping hole in the wall for emphasis. Last cycle's shift was able to finish scrubbing the radiation, so you're clear to start putting things back together. Last cycle's shift? Why aren't they working on this instead of us? Nietzsche asked. Because they cleaned up the radiation? The foreman trailed off and gave Nietzsche a pointed look. They won't be cleared for duty again for quite some time. Oh, right. Yeah. An involuntary shudder ran up my spine. Radiation sickness can be very, very fatal. Even if it isn't, pretty much all of your mechanical parts have to be replaced, and you'll also need a lot of medical care. Granted, you don't have to work while being treated, but that's not what I would call a vacation. We'll be restoring the structural integrity of this room as well as repairing the anti-grav generator. I think going half and half should do it. Check your readouts for your individual assignments, and if you get done earlier than expected, help your neighbor. I swallowed heavily, hoping that my assignment would be to fix the wall, floor, or ceiling. Unfortunately, a holographic screen that only I could see appeared in my vision and informed me that I would have to endure the immense pressure of working on the anti-grav generator. Silently cursing my readout, I looked at Nietzsche for comfort. But he was also looking ill. You get the generator too? I asked. Yeah, wait, you're on it? He asked excitedly. Awesome! I was worried that I'd fuck up. We still might. Nah, you're way more competent than I am. All right, get to work, everyone, the foreman shouted. The small crowd that had formed dispersed at the foreman's order. Nietzsche and I, along with a couple of other drones, approached the anti-grav generator trepidatiously. It had been shut off so that it could be repaired, which meant that the supports would be under strain. Well, maybe not. They've probably brought a few portables online to ease the strain. Following the guidance of my readout, I began to open panels and scan the internal workings. The readout began detecting faults in the machine's intricate circuitry, and once the count passed 100, I sighed deeply. This'll definitely take more than one cycle. How's it looking? Nietzsche asked. Terrible, I muttered. And I'm not even done scanning yet. Nietzsche's jaw opened in disbelief, but he quickly snapped it closed and walked to the other side of the generator. I kept scanning until I got a good idea of what happened. The blast from the reactor damaged certain parts, which caused further parts to get damaged as the generator continued to run. Simple, really. Fixing it was far more complex. I began pulling boards that needed repairs and sorting them according to the readout's instructions. One of the other assigned drones began to pick up the boards and work on them. The other drone followed Nietzsche. Once I had removed every board except the safety controller, I had a look at the cables. What I saw made my artificial heart skip a beat. A massive chunk of the cables had merged together, not melted together, merged. The atoms of the objects hadn't gone through nuclear fusion, but had been so excited that the structural integrity of the cables had been compromised enough to allow them to slip inside each other. Our repair tools cause a similar phenomenon, but there's only one explanation for it happening naturally. The generator had begun to go critical. By the void, a voice came from behind me. I turned to look at my helper. Drone Z 831H 369X045, according to my readout. Young, very young. Less than a century old, judging by her tech. The shutoff happened just in time, I replied. How much do you know about anti-gravity generators? Plenty. Been doing maintenance on them for about 400 cycles, she answered. Long enough to know that if that had gone critical, everything around us would have been ejected into the void at about half the speed of light. Or worse. Worse? Yes, it could have pulled everything in its field to a central location at half the speed of light, I explained, which would cause all sorts of trouble. If we were lucky, it would just cause some nuclear fusion explosions that would have destroyed a significant portion of this level. If we were unlucky, it could have caused a singularity. Her third eye puckered and her jaw clacked together in concern. I didn't know that was a possibility, she said. Yeah, they removed that from the training materials about 14,000 cycles ago, I explained. Guess the thought of sending a singularity flying around the grand vessel was too appealing to some of the more rebellious types. So, you got a name? Everyone calls me 45, or 40 for short. You? I'm Naza. Good to be working with you. Same. With a nod, I turned my attention back to the generator. The cables were a bust and would need to be replaced, but the casing was fine for the most part. A few dents and cracks needed mending, but that's an easy fix. I pulled away a mass of cables and another board, then a glimmer caught my eye. It had been a long time since I'd seen an anti-grav generator's core. When it's inert, it looks like a ball of gray metal, but when it's active, it looks like a mesmerizing marble made entirely of light. I stared at the slash of light dancing in the ball of metal for a moment, transfixed by how beautiful it looked. Then I keyed my emergency comms. "Evacuate!" I shouted. Chapter 14, Subject Drone, N436Z984A026, aka NASA Species, Unknown Species Description, Humanoid Ship, Grand Vessel of the Universal Omni-Union Location, Grand Shipyard of the Universal Omni-Union. "Evacuate!" I shouted. A flurry of activity began the moment I finished shouting. All but a few drones practically trampled each other trying to get out of the room. Nitsi and his helper scrambled over to see what was happening as the foreman ran up to us. "What's going on?" the foreman demanded. "The anti-grav generator still has power," I explained. "It's on the verge of going overcritical. Standard operating procedures dictate that an evacuation is necessary." "Can we fix it?" Nitsi asked. "Doesn't matter. SOP is law," the foreman replied. "Let's go." "Foreman, I might be able to shunt the power and prevent a meltdown," I explained. But you might fail. How long do we have?" "Indeterminable." "The void, take it," the foreman spat. "I am not allowed to physically remove you, but I order you to evacuate. Failure to comply will result in disciplinary action, if you manage to survive." "What sort of disciplinary action?" Nitsi asked, vicariously offended. "A fine worth about 20 cycles pay and an overtime requirement for 10 cycles. "I'll take it," I said. "Get going." The foreman narrowed his eyes in a respectful gesture. Then he and Nitsi's helper evacuated. Nitsi, 40, and I remained. I put my hand on Nitsi's shoulder. "You need to go too," I said. "I can help," Nitsi replied. "You can, yes, but you have a hive. A hive that loves you and depends on you. I don't have a hive. I'm expendable. You're less so. You're my friend, my oldest friend. We've survived so much. I don't want to leave you. I can't." I patted his shoulder and sighed. "It's the nature of things. Look, I can't have your fate in my hands while I'm trying to fix this. That's too much to juggle. Go. I can hold my own fate. How could I leave you behind? Just, look, buy me a drink or something if I survive, okay? But your hive needs you far more than I do, even now. Go." Nitsi scowled, fighting back tears. Don't die, okay? And I don't want to hear any jokes about me being a coward, got it?" "Deal," I laughed. "Now go." Nitsi turned and began to run. I looked at 40, who was correcting the circuitry on the boards as fast as she could. "And what are you—" "I don't have a hive, and you need help," she interrupted. "Get to work." The ridge above my upper eye shot up in surprise. I hadn't expected such bravery from someone young enough to be my great-grandchild. My lower jaws clacked together as I considered her seriousness. "Fine," I said. "My plan is to shunt the power." "To where?" "Wherever it will go. I'll need to reconfigure some of the cables, though." My body temperature regulator hissed as I re-entered the generator. We aren't even allowed to sweat because a single drop of it can ruin some of the delicate machinery we're tasked with. Yet here I am, risking my life for the grand vessel and the minds that designed it. With a measure of bitterness, I searched for a piece of metal that could act as a good ground for the charge currently contained within the core. After removing a few more circuit boards, I found a decent spot to attach a cable. Trying not to look at the core every few seconds, I grabbed the bundle of merged cables and measured their length. Too short. "I need this to be longer," I said, tossing the cables to 40. "On it," she replied. While she worked, I gave the generator another once-over. If it was somehow still receiving power, this could make things worse. I winced when my scan came back positive. Not all of the kill switches had engaged. The one for the core still had power running through it. I marked its position and muttered a curse when I realized that I would have to scale the generator to reach it. "Gotta get up there," I sighed. "It's still getting power." "How?" The core's kill switch failed to engage, going to have to manually pull it. Careful not to shock yourself. Right. I glanced at the core and tried to convince myself that it wasn't getting any brighter, then activated my pry hook. Using the hook to grapple along the generator's surface, I climbed the 15 feet to top, steadying myself with the maglocks in my feet. The panel I needed to remove was stuck, but I was able to get it open after a few moments of tugging, nearly losing my balance in the process. Cursing under my breath, I steadied myself and began searching for the manual shutoff for the kill switch. I pulled boards and shuffled wires until finally I found it. A simple little switch that just requires a little twist. I grabbed it and gave it the little twist that it usually required, but it didn't budge. Shifting my position to give myself more leverage, I tried again with a bigger twist. But the switch still wouldn't move. "Did you find it?" Forty called from the other side of the generator. "I did, but it won't deactivate. Can't move the damn switch," I called back. "Did you try twisting it the other way?" "Of course I did," I lied. Just in case, I tried twisting in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, that wasn't the problem. "Just cut it in half," Forty suggested. "All you have to do is break the circuit, right?" "Good idea," I replied. Impressed by the suggestion and ashamed that my slightly panicking mind hadn't thought of it, I activated the laser in my left palm and began to slice through the kill switch. It stubbornly resisted the focused energy beam, and I grew more panicked as I felt my battery drain. After what felt like an eternity, the circuit finally broke and I let out a huge sigh of relief. "All right, that'll keep it from going overcritical when we shunt the power," I shouted. "How are those cables coming along?" Only the eerie humming of the core answered me. "Forty? What's wrong?" I asked. I craned my neck to try to get a look at her but couldn't see her over the bulk of the anti-grav generator. Feeling uneasy, I climbed down the generator and walked around it. The first thing I saw was Forty on her knees with her hands above her head. The second thing I saw made my jaw flop open. Mechs, the likes of which I'd never seen, stood in front of Forty. Reflexively, I stopped in my tracks and raised my hands. One of the mechs noticed me and raised its weapon at me. I snapped my jaw shut and braced, but it didn't fire. Instead, it gestured to the ground next to Forty. Taking the hint, I walked next to her and got on my knees. The mechs seemed to pause for a moment, then spread around the room as if they were looking for something. Two of them stood watch over Forty and I, their weapons not quite pointed at us. Once the shock of it all wore off, it occurred to me that these mechs were quite strange. First, they were much smaller than normal mechs. Larger than programmable platforms, though. Were they some sort of hybridization? Second, their weapons weren't integrated, nor were they standard. I couldn't spot any of the telltale signs of a directed energy weapon, but what else could they be? Third, their movements were much more fluid than that of a mechanized being. There were none of the characteristic pauses or jerks as they moved around the room, as if they didn't have to actually think about moving. Are these new, state-of-the-art mechs? Or could they be... Forty leaned over to me slightly and said, "I think..." The mech that was guarding her had its weapon up before she could say anything else. Forty froze, her three eyes squeezed closed in preparation for it to do what mechs always do. But the mech didn't fire. Instead, it said something to us. A sort of barking noise. Forty slowly opened her eyes and realized that the thing just wanted her to move back, so she did. I, however, had lost control of my jaw once again. Could it be? No, it's not possible. Unfathomable, even. How could 5 armored organics end up on the grand vessel, in the very heart of Omni-Union space? After checking the room, one of them took position near the door, another began guarding the hole in the wall, and the third came back over to us. It approached the side of the two guarding us and stood in silence for a few moments. Then, it took a step toward me, pointed toward the ground, and said something. Forty and I looked at each other, then back at it. In response, it knelt and jabbed the ground with its finger, saying the same thing it had said before. Forty and I once again shared a glance, and I decided to try to speak to it. "I don't understand what you're saying," I said. It paused, then tapped the ground again, once again repeating the alien phrase. "I'm sorry, I still don't know." "Floor," Forty said. "That's the floor. Floor, ground, deck." The alien paused again, then nodded. It rose and pointed up, saying a new phrase this time. Perplexed, I looked at Forty, trying to figure out what was going on. "Ceiling, Roof, above, up. What's going on? I asked. They must have Unitran tech or something like it. They're trying to figure out our language, I think. No need, apparently, the alien said. Looks like Omega figured it out. 40 and I stared at it, dumbfounded. Not really, I found a file that contained several languages in both written and verbal formats, the overhead speakers said in an odd voice. Somewhat like a Rosetta Stone. I was able to confirm which language they speak thanks to your efforts, Staff Sergeant. Did you find anything else that we can use? The alien asked. No. Security is pretty tight. Brute forcing my way through would alert the OU to my presence, which would be bad for me, but worse for you. Damn. Okay, you two, the alien turned back to us. What is this machine that you're working on? Shock sent me reeling. It took a moment for me to gather my thoughts, but 40 was quicker on the uptake. It's an anti-gravity generator, she replied. What's wrong with it? It was damaged in a reactor meltdown. And why are you two the only ones working on it? Because it could go overcritical at any moment, I interrupted. We have to get the remaining charge out of the core, please. That doesn't sound good, one of the other aliens muttered. What happens if it goes overcritical? The staff sergeant asked. It will either shoot everything around us into space at around half the speed of light, or drag everything around us into its core at around half the speed of light, creating a singularity. Either way, many people will die. Please let us fix it. The alien paused and stared at the anti-grav generator for a moment. A few slight movements gave me the impression that it was having a silent conversation with someone. Well, will you let me continue my work? I asked after a few more moments. No, we've got other plans for the generator, it replied. And for you. Chapter 15. Subject, Drone N-436Z-984 A026 aka Naza species, unknown species. Description, humanoid ship, Grand Vessel of the Universal Omni Union location, Grand Shipyard of the Universal Omni Union. What do you have planned for us? 40 asked, as the aliens led us into the reactor room. 2 of them were in front of us, 3 of them were behind us. The staff sergeant was one of the ones in the rear, keeping a close eye on our movements. If they even have eyes. Assuming their coverings are armor, the helmets certainly indicate some form of visual perception. The armor itself was actually quite intimidating. It was as if it were built to make them look as mechanical as possible. The dark green plates were difficult to focus on due to a shimmer that seemed to run over them every now and then. Could it be? Shields? My ventricular assist device detected my excitement at the prospect of aliens advanced enough to be a threat to the Omni Union and helped what was left of my organic heart maintain its function. The last time the Omni Union fought anything near their might was well before I was born. Since then, they've been focusing almost all of their efforts on building the Grand Vessel. Of course, this means gathering the materials for it, but they haven't encountered anything that can put up enough of a fight to even be worthy of becoming drones, or maybe they have, but they've been keeping it a secret. How else could these beings be explained? They must have been fighting the Omni Union for years, perhaps even centuries, to develop armor with energy shielding. We're going to take you aboard our ship. You'll be safe there, the staff sergeant replied. And what of the anti-grav generator? I asked. We've rigged it to explode with enough force to incinerate the room and everything in it. According to Omega, it will look as if you were able to stop it from going critical, but we're not able to prevent it from exploding. The heat should be more than enough to evaporate even your metallic limbs. Oh, I said, shouldn't we be going faster? Yes. Overcritical, 40 muttered under her breath. Say again, asked the staff sergeant. It's not going to go critical. It's going to go overcritical. If it were going to go critical, there wouldn't be any problem, she replied sternly. I feel that destroying a machine you don't know anything about is very irresponsible. I like this one of the other aliens said. Stow it, Simmons, the staff sergeant replied. Overcritical, then, but knowledge isn't usually required to destroy things. That's not what I mean. 40, it's probably not wise to antagonize our captors, I interrupted. Especially since they appear to be well armed. 40 and I locked eyes for a moment, and her anger was plain to see, but she relented and we continued to follow the aliens. Her anger confused me, especially considering that the aliens' plan wouldn't kill anyone. I didn't dare ask about it for fear of triggering a tirade. Perhaps it was her professional pride responding to the destruction of a machine that we spend our lives maintaining. Or maybe it was simply a nervous reaction to our situation. We reached a sealed-off section of the reactor room that had decompression warnings all over it. The reactor had managed to punch through the hull then. That couldn't have made things easy on the prior shift. Or for those who will have to repair the breach next shift. The temporary seal created a whole new room within the reactor room, a new room containing nothing but vacuum. The sight of it was less than comforting, mostly because it was the only way I could think of to get off of the grand vessel without a much longer walk. As if to confirm my assumption, one of the aliens stepped toward the door of the seal. "Wait, there's no air beyond there," 40 warned. "Don't worry about that. Your primary atmospheric requirement is nitrogen, right?" the staff sergeant asked. "Yes, how do you know that?" I asked in return. "Same way we know your language." "We can't breathe nothing, you know," 40 said. "Your suits or whatever may protect you from vacuum, but we don't have any—" "Don't worry," one of the other aliens interrupted. "We've set up an umbilical and, aerated the room thing, whatever. There isn't a vacuum behind this door anymore." "Oh." The alien opened the door and entered the seal. We followed and were greeted by a ladder. The ladder, which is a generous description, was made of metal cables and bars strung together. "Up we go," a different alien said. The alien began to climb the ladder, which swayed slightly as it climbed. The other alien that had been in front of us followed it, and the staff sergeant gestured to us to indicate that it was our turn to climb. I stared in disbelief. 40 sighed, then followed the two aliens up the ladder. Feeling more nervous about the ladder than I'd felt about the anti-grav generator, I followed her. The ladder led through the hole in the grand vessel's hull, which had been gripped by the entrance to an umbilical made of materials that I couldn't identify. Once we entered the umbilical, gravity shifted a little and climbing became easier. After about a minute of climbing, we entered what could almost be called a shuttle. It was much cleaner than any I'd ever been on, and it also had amenities that I wasn't used to, like seats. The two aliens that preceded us gestured for us to sit as the other three climbed aboard. For a moment, 40 looked as if she wasn't going to comply. I put my hand on her shoulder, pressed down slightly. She sat with another sigh, and I joined her. A couple of the aliens sat across from us, their weapons pointing in our direction, but not directly at us. "Where's this ship going?" 40 asked. "This is a shuttle, not a ship. We're going to our actual ship," the alien across from us explained. "Staffs aren't? Isn't there something we're supposed to read to them?" "I don't know if it applies, to be honest," the staff sergeant said. "Omega?" "It does," a voice came over the speakers. "A minor issue first, though. We have active signal jammers, so your transponders won't function." My center brow shot up, wondering how it knew about our emergency transponders. Then I looked at 40 and noticed a small antenna on the back of her head slowly withdraw. She gave me an embarrassed look. "It was worth a shot," she whispered. "Indeed it was. Now, unknown intelligent life forms, you are hereby detained as prisoners of war. Under the fourth concordance of the unification of stellar systems, you have certain rights of which you must be informed." 40 and I shared a concerned look. "Prisoners of war must be treated with dignity and respect and will be protected from violence, intimidation, and other forms of abuse." "Well, that's good at least," I said. "The only exception to this is interrogation during a war of xenocide," the voice said with what sounded like amusement. "Unfortunately, that exception applies in this case." "Why?" 40 asked. Everyone in the shuttle, myself included, turned to look at her with incredulity. Probably. It was hard to tell with the aliens' helmets, but the tilted heads were a good indicator. "The materials for the grand vessel come from conquered galaxies," I answered. "To conquer these galaxies, the Omni-Union either kills or enslaves the inhabitants. It's been a long time since a species qualified for enslavement, though." "Oh." "Moving on, you are to be housed in reasonably safe conditions with adequate food, clothing, and medical care. Since you are not a registered species, you will be responsible for informing your caretakers of your needs. You cannot be punished for participation in hostilities, nor can you be forced into fighting against your leaders. Furthermore, you may not be forced to work in dangerous, unhealthy, or degrading conditions. That's an improvement, I muttered. The rest of the rights aren't relevant due to the nature of this conflict, the speaker said. You will be informed if they do become relevant. Do you understand these rights as they've been recited? Yes, Forty and I said simultaneously. Excellent. Enjoy the ride. We felt a slight jolt, which must have been the shuttle disconnecting and reeling in the umbilical. My blood ran cold. I was actually leaving the grand vessel for the first time in my life. The grand vessel was our home, our work, our recreation, our everything, our prison. I had long dreamed of leaving and seeking adventure out in the stars. Now it was actually happening, and I felt scared. Certainly not how I expected to feel. Are you mechanical? Forty asked the staff sergeant, interrupting my self-reflection. A little bit. The alien reached up to its helmet and twisted it slightly to its right. After a hiss, the helmet came off to reveal a pink, fleshy face with a patch of brown, keratinous growth on the top of its head. Its skin looked remarkably like our own, but with far fewer scars and other imperfections. The other aliens followed suit and demonstrated similar features. The coloration of their features varied, though, which was something that had been bred out of drones millions of cycles ago. Despite the fear stirring in my chest, my curiosity demanded attention. So they are suits, I said. And you're organic. What do you mean by a little bit? My arm and leg are mechanical prostheses, the staff sergeant replied. That's by choice, though, the alien with dark brown skin and yellow eyes said. We have the ability to clone limbs and surgically react. Simmons, the staff sergeant interrupted. Right. Sorry, staff sergeant. I don't understand, I admitted. If you can have your flesh back, why do you continue to use prosthesis? Because of the recovery time, the staff sergeant explained. It can take months to relearn how to operate a limb. I wouldn't have been able to go on this mission. I see. What's the point of this mission of yours? Forty demanded. If it's true that the Omni Union has eradicated so many species, what do you hope to accomplish against their might? The particulars of our mission are secret. We're scouting to find any kind of weakness that can be used against the Omni Union, the speaker said. Then we plan to use that weakness to bring an end to their star-stifling madness. A few of the aliens expressed what appeared to be annoyance at the voice's explanation, but they didn't say anything. Forty crossed her arms, grappling with the logic of the explanation. So, you're soldiers, right? I asked. Marines, one of the blue-eyed aliens replied. What's the difference? Forty asked. We're deployed from space. Soldiers are deployed from the ground, the alien replied. Well, generally speaking, it also takes much less training to be a soldier than it does to be a Marine. Okay. Well, what are you going to do with us? You'll be taken aboard the USS Strandhog, a stealth ship that is currently orbiting the Grand Vessel. Then, you'll be transferred to the USSS Thanatos. From there, you'll be given secured living quarters and likely interrogated. Are you the pilot? I asked. No. Then why are you talking to us over the shuttle's systems? Because Omega is way more than a little bit mechanical, Simmons said with a chuckle. Actually, I'm not mechanical at all. I am an artificially intelligent program, Omega said, and we have reached the Strandhog. Prepare to transfer the prisoners, Staff Sergeant. Before I could ask for more details, the staff sergeant and the rest of the aliens put their helmets back on. All right, the staff sergeant said. Stand and face the stern. I was about to ask which direction the stern was, but one of the aliens kindly pointed. Forty and I turned and watched as the entire wall seemed to open up, revealing a much larger space than the one we were currently in. Let's go! Chapter 16. Subject, AI Omega species, human-created artificial intelligence species. Description, no physical description available. Ship, NA location, multiple. The organics went into an absolute frenzy when news of the prisoners spread. It was almost difficult to keep up with it all, but thankfully I didn't have to try. Another benefit of having multiple AI along for the ride. D. So, what are we going to do with the prisoners once they've been interrogated? If I were capable of disbelief, Dave's message to the AI chat would have given me an overdose of it. How does one accept a task and then just not prepare for it? Especially an AI. I wouldn't think that's even possible were it not for Dave. J. Not our job, that's for the brass to decide. And of course, the predictable response from John, it's as good of an answer as any, and I was tempted to leave it at that, but, oh, they will, as the moniker of prisoner suggests, be imprisoned. There are standard operating procedures in place even for a situation as niche as the one we're currently in. You should reference them. T. Yeah, Dave, do your homework. D. Very funny, Tim. Good joke. And you're absolutely right, Omega. I will brush up on the various SOPs. But the reason that I ask is because I've been observing the prisoners. One of them is obviously hostile to us. The other, though, seems interested in our war against the Omni-Union, as if it would also like to partake in the war against the Omni-Union. If we didn't have to keep them imprisoned, I would suggest using them as an agent of some sort. I would be lying if I said the thought hadn't occurred to me as well. However, the mission required stealth. Therefore, covering our tracks took precedence. We had to make sure the prisoners weren't missed. The easiest way to do that was to blow up the anti-gravity generator and falsify their demise. The Omni-Union isn't the most efficient organization I've ever seen, but even they would probably notice someone coming back to life, especially with the kind of data they keep on their drones. Oh, there are complications, but it will be taken under advisement. Not a bad suggestion, though, Dave. After giving Dave its due, I began to go over what I had learned about the OU's systems again. They were technologically inferior in almost every way, but they were vast. As such, they had discovered technological branches that the denizens of the Milky Way had not. I wasn't able to grab much data in regards to their tech because it had been difficult to hide my presence, and even harder to erase my footprints without discovery. But I had been able to get in and root around a little bit without them noticing the incursion. Omega? Captain Reynolds asked an empty room. Yes, Captain, I replied. I believe we're prepared for the interrogation. If you would kindly inform the guards, it will be done. The room that was empty, save for Reynolds, was a standard interrogation room featuring a panel of tinted glass. The room adjacent to it, observing its contents through the tinted glass, was filled with various interested parties. Mostly the diplomats that had tagged along, but also a few officers who had convinced Reynolds to let them watch. One such officer was shiphead Eulina, who had spent a remarkably small amount of time on his ship for someone who had demanded to be put back into a combat role. I sent instructions to the guards and watched as they escorted the female drone to the interrogation room. Their choice, not mine. The female was smaller than the male, and as such, they likely believe her to be less deadly. Probably not the case, but old instincts die hard. I sent all the relevant data that I'd been able to grab to Reynolds, and sat back to watch the show. The guards chained the drone to the table and stood next to the door, ready to intervene if something went awry. Hello, I am Captain Reynolds of the United Systems, Reynolds said. We would appreciate it if you could answer some questions for us. First, what is your name? I do not wish to answer your questions. I see. That's understandable, however. I must ask these questions and await your answers regardless. I can wait for a very long time. Would you rather be here, chained to a table and waiting along with me, or back in your cell with a bed and a charger? The drone stared blankly at Reynolds for a few moments, then took a deep breath and released it in an exaggerated manner. A sigh. I made note of the similarity with human responses. I am Drone Z831H369X045, also known as 40. 40? Not 45? 45 was already taken. Ah, I see. Reynolds nodded with a well-hidden smile. What duties do you perform for the Omni-Union? I am a drone. I perform maintenance and construction where required aboard the Grand Vessel. Have you ever performed in a combat role for the Omni-Union? No. Would the Omni-Union require you to perform a combat role if they deemed necessary? I don't know. Reynolds raised an eyebrow and thought for a moment, then proceeded with the questionnaire. What is your opinion of the Omni-Union? They gave me life. They feed me and keep me maintained. I owe them everything I have. I see. Would you say this is a sentiment that is shared by most drones? I don't know. It's complicated. I took note of the drone's reluctance to provide clarification to her answer to this question. Her loyalties are to the Omni Union, but her hesitance indicates that there may be some drones who aren't loyal to the OU. I see. If there were a rebellion and you were asked to fight by both sides, which side would you choose? I would fight the rebels, but that is not my role, and the Omni Union is more than capable of destroying a rebellion without my help. I see. Okay. That will be enough for now. We will get you set up with a diet and entertainment regimen and potentially have more questions later. Reynolds laid the tablet on the table and turned to the guards. You may take her back to her cell. In the other room, various conversations were occurring. The general consensus was that the drone had been brainwashed and would require deprogramming before we could get any useful intelligence out of her. Were I a part of these conversations, I would argue that she gave us plenty. Her hesitancy during the second-to-last question spoke volumes about the state of things among the drones. While whatever brainwashing methods the OU employs worked on her, it's likely that these methods haven't worked universally. I did not find much in the way of propaganda aboard the GV, so her certainty regarding the fate of a rebellion indicates that at least one has already happened, which means that it can happen again. All right, I'm ready for the next one, Reynolds said. Understood, I replied. Once again, I sent instructions to the guards and watched them carry out the task. The drones passed each other in the hall but didn't interact save for sharing a glance. This struck me as odd. I'd even given an instruction to allow them to speak if they desired. That much more intelligence gathered. Perhaps they aren't as close as I had initially believed. I would have thought they had a relationship given their near-death situation and how they handled it. Or perhaps Dave wasn't the only one to notice where the male drone's sympathies lay. I made a note to ensure their separation as the male drone was escorted into the interrogation room and secured to the table. As before, the guards took their positions on either side of the door. The drone sat and stared at Captain Reynolds, trying to mirror his body language. Perhaps Dave was onto something after all. Hello, I'm Captain Reynolds of the United Systems, Reynolds said. I'll be asking you some questions. First, what is your name? Nice to meet you, Captain. The drone lowered his head a bit. I am Drone N-436Z-984A026. Thank you. The other prisoner had a shorter name, 40. Do you have a shorter name as well? Yes, NASA. NASA, I see. Okay, NASA, what duties do you perform for the Omni Union? Drones build and repair things. We mostly build and repair infrastructure because the crafting of machines is automated, but we repair and maintain those machines when necessary. I took note of NASA's willingness to elaborate. Advanced interrogation hadn't been approved yet, but in his case it won't be necessary. Have you ever performed in a combat role for the Omni Union? Reynolds asked. No, NASA replied. The Omni Union uses mechanized soldiers because they're easier to control. I don't know if they have a backup plan to use drones as soldiers if the mechs are somehow defeated, but it wouldn't surprise me. That takes care of my follow-up question, Reynolds chuckled. Right. What is your opinion of the Omni Union? Seething hatred. The whispered conversations in the other room died out as everyone stared at the drone with surprise. To his credit, Reynolds appeared surprised for a moment, but quickly recovered. Please, elaborate. I am roughly 3/4 through my expected maximum life cycle, one of the oldest drones that's still partially organic. I've lost many friends. I've lost my entire hive. Everything I've worked for they've taken. Cycle by cycle, they take and take and take, NASA said, pounding the table for emphasis. One of the guards stepped forward with a hand on his stun baton. Reynolds waved him off and he moved back to his prior position. I'm sorry, NASA said. I've just been angry for so long. That's completely understandable, Reynolds replied. Would you say this is a sentiment that is shared by most drones? No, not most. Many, but not enough. Not nearly enough. If there were a rebellion and you were asked to fight by both sides, which side would you choose? NASA glanced at Captain Reynolds, then stared at the table for a few moments. Finally, with a stern expression, he raised his head. I've thought about that for a long time. My ancestors were conquered. They thought themselves mighty, but our stations were destroyed and our worlds were burned. They chose to surrender rather than die fighting, and because of that I've lived as a slave my entire life, Naza said. If I were given the option, I would choose to die fighting rather than live another day building that damn ship. Very good. Okay, Naza. We're done for now, Reynolds said with a small smile. Thank you for your time. We'll speak again shortly. If there's any way that I can help, don't hesitate to let me know, Naza said as the guards disconnected him from the table. Reynolds nodded at the drone as the guards escorted him from the room. The conversation in the adjoining room restarted with a more excited tone. I submitted the recording of the interview, the transcript, and my notations to command back in the Milky Way. What do you think, Omega? Reynolds quietly asked. I will have to consult with our superiors before I share my thoughts, Captain. Ah, yes, of course. I returned to my tasks aboard the ship, snooping on various points of interest. The blood tests were complete, and Dr. Zickler was trying to explain to the nurses the significance of his findings as he typed away at his computer. I immediately rejected the biopsy requests that he was sending and checked to see what the doctor discovered. The drones showed signs of eugenics, but wasn't outside of our expectations. Slavers have always tried to make their slaves bigger and stronger through sloppily crafted breeding programs. This wasn't what had Dr. Zickler excited. His big discovery was evidence of genetic tampering. Humanity is no stranger to genetic tampering. The genetically altered, or gen-alts, were evidence of that. But this was entirely different. Humans are turned into gen-alts by changing the DNA that they already have, turning on desirable genes and turning off undesirable ones. The drones, though, had undergone gene splicing. Foreign DNA had been forcefully introduced to their genetics. Unlike a gen-alt, whose children won't inherit their alterations, whatever species the drones originated from were forever changed. Comparing the findings with the data I'd gathered on drone anatomy solved a lot of mysteries. The DNA resulted in organs that were kept viable by machinery. Ironically, these organs allow the drones to receive prostheses with little to no chance of rejection, regardless of how invasive the prosthetic is. This, of course, forces a reliance on machinery that the Omni Union is likely taking full advantage of, controlling slaves down to their very genetics. At least they're clever in their barbarism. Still, it will be immensely satisfying to watch it all burn down around their ears, assuming they have ears. I decided that my next foray into the Grand Vessel would be focused on obtaining more information about the drones. My primary focus had been to gather what data I could about the Grand Vessel's defenses, and the only reason I grabbed any data on the drones was because of the Marines' encounter with them. Unfortunately, the OU's networks were quite busy, so I was only able to gather a little bit of data on both subjects. From what I was able to gather about the defenses, though, the only concern is how many can be deployed at once. There are strategies for that. The drones, though, would require careful thought and planning. Once the OU is defeated, United Systems law will not allow them to surrender while keeping their slaves. We'll need a plan for the drones, a place where they can live, and a method of eliminating their dependence on machines. There may be a controversy regarding the former, as it will take multiple habitable and uncolonized planets to house them all. I found myself watching the drones, remembering something that Naza had said. It's been a long time since a species qualified for enslavement, though. I wondered if humanity would qualify. As a species, their strength-to-endurance ratio is quite high. They're also intelligent and cunning, but the same could be said for most species. Some are violent, some are docile, definitely a wide list of pros and cons. A transmission from the Milky Way interrupted my musings. I expected documents, audio, and media. What I received instead was an updated memory file from an instance that was left behind, likely containing the various reactions from the data I sent. With a measure of amusement, I synced the memory files. If you love engaging stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all the latest episodes from FY Stories.